Paranoia is moved out by Mayu over on Skyline D, wanting to make sure nobody gets in that zone. But now he gets debuffed with that Nightmare Bolt pacification area, wanting to make sure that one more player at least is within that area. Otherwise, he will be unable to cast or attack or do anything, really. But they will be downing Shade of Xavius soon. Team Omega Snipe, a bit sloppy on that last pull. Of course, no full white. They do manage to res Luffy, but was looking a bit dire there at the end. But they are getting ready as well to pull Shade in a moment. Yeah,
you're seeing Fang going down on the side of Skyline D here. There are 10% left on the boss. Again, no extra battle reses left available to them, so you kind of have to burn that last little percent. Thankfully, we're in the fortified setting, so it's not going to be too big of a difference for the rest of the team here as they're just mopping up the last of it. But again, they still have that 2% trash percentage that they have to make up here as Omega Snipe is just now starting with Xavius.
Skyline D finishes off Xavius, rushes over to that trash pack that we just mentioned before, likely to kill the lowest health mob, which I believe will be that imp on the side. Should give the remaining percentage. Team Omega sniped on the right side, moving over Shade of Xavius, 74% right now. They will, of course, have that extra 45 seconds to try and finish off the rest of this dungeon. So as soon as Skyline D gets that 100% on the board, we'll have some time. But we see I'm Fired Up going down, no battle res available, and just a huge pull coming up for Team Omega Sniped.
Yeah, at this point, Skyline D is losing Mayu as well here. So 11 deaths on the board. They have their 100% trash percentage. Their time has been finalized. Now that they've got that 100%. But Omega Snipe losing one of their DPS in the middle of their Bloodlust timing. They're still having all the extra cleave damage is going to be going on here. So very important that they have to make up this time as best as they can, but it really is just looking like a dire situation for them.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where those Bloodseekers came from in the end, and they need it for only 1%, so I believe it's the ones that they skipped earlier in the pack. Grabbing them on top of Xavius right now is going to be a long time before they're able to kill this. Lots of healing is going to be coming out. Luckily, that dot does go on Zyronic, who's able to just kind of help the healer through it with a lot of that drain. Hadrian getting a lot of those dots from the bats, which not only do a ton of damage that you mentioned earlier, Jack, but also leech health from the tanking, give them back to the bats, providing a lot of extended life on them, which is the last thing you want to see. We see the Purgatory proc over on Hadrian. Things are looking pretty messy right now, and the time is ticking down for the team, and it looks like that's just going to do it for them as Hadrian does go down, and we actually have Skyline D claiming the first game. I mean, that was an excellent performance, Jack, from Skyline D. And we were talking just about how refined they are and how great they looked in their regionals. And even though they had a bit of a roster change up here, I mean, they were just looking the exact same powerhouse.
Roster change proves not to be an issue. And we went into this talking about the fact that Skyline D was praised by other teams for their creativity, their willingness to innovate in how they approach the game. And, you know, what is a month and a half realistically to watch other teams to practice? What does it ultimately mean? And we can tell there just in how aggressively they were playing it, that was a totally different team in terms of how much they were really prioritizing speed as a resource. Speed was the primary thing, and we heard that from teams all throughout our interviews with them. Speed is what matters. It's not can you survive, you have to survive. It's not how much damage can you do, you just have to do it. It's how fast can you make this run, and Skyline D looking very powerful early on.
Yeah, I like to being able to see, you know, like you mentioned, being able to see other teams' strategies, being able to refine your own. It goes such a far way in being able to actually take on teams from another region.
All right, well, Skyline D currently with the advantage. Will they be able to close out this first series of the day, or will Team Omega Snipe snipe back? We'll find out after the break. For the Alliance, indeed. Certainly something I alone on the desk stand for. But, don't worry, anyone out there with you. Obviously, Skyline D now currently 1-0 over Team Omega Sniped, and that's in stark contrast to kind of maybe some of the caster predictions, but this is why I don't predict things, by the way. Sours, obviously you were watching the match from the back the whole time, and you actually picked out a play that you wanted to highlight for us.
Yeah, so Skyline D, they were just pulling ahead every single pull of the dungeon, but there is one pull where we did see quite a big hiccup, so I do want to look at that a little bit more closely so we can see kind of the danger that Bolster Sanguine poses here in this dungeon. You know, like, so many mobs in this dungeon can just go like a little poorly, and you see here that these mobs are going to cast Root Burst right when the mobs around them die. This Sanguine goes off, Eepel falls down, perhaps he gets hit by a Root Burst, which does an incredible amount of damage, or standing maybe in a tick of Sanguine. And you know, each tick of Sanguine, of course, is a percentage health heal. So when these mobs are at these high bolster stacks, each Sanguine tick is like that much more extra time they have to do. You know, this is the huge wipe out of Skyline D. This was a really big opportunity for Omega Snipe to come back into the race, but Skyline D just kept pulling bigger and bigger, and you know, they turned that extra inch into a mile, and then they pulled out just a little bit further ahead at the end of the dungeon.
Right, and as I said before we went to break, when we talked to the teams, we were kind of asking them, like, oh, what do you think of these affixes? What do you think of these maps? And they just kept saying the same thing over and over. What matters is speed. How do we get the dungeon done the most quickly? And that's what we saw from Skyline D there. You know, they were, we're going to play a little sloppy. The execution's not going to be amazing, but we're going to make sure that we get the fastest possible finish time, and that's exactly what they did. Now, obviously, the Map 2 affixes are locked. This is not something that Team Omega Snipe will be able to choose, which is a little bit of a contrast from how we did things in the regional weekends. So you want to talk us through the format for this event?
I would love to, Robin. My essay, your hair looks excellent today. So we have mostly the same as we saw in the regionals earlier. Teams will choose their classes, lock them in for the entirety of the series. They can change specs within those classes, Fire Mage going Frost, for example, but they cannot change classes, so they have to dedicate ahead of time. We know that the first map and affix combination will be locked by Blizzard. The only small change now is that the loser before in the regional stage would pick the map and affix. However, now they do not have access to the affix pick anymore. They will only be choosing the map pick, which allows teams to get some extra practice in on those set affixes on the maps.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were mentioning, there is still a degree of customization in terms of how you approach each map. And, you know, you can actually obviously check out what the people playing right now are wearing in terms of their gear. We do have that extension right there, the Twitch MDI tooltips powered by Wowhead. So certainly get out there, see what these teams are using, how that could potentially help your game. Now, talking again about the Twitch poll we launched earlier, let's go ahead and take a look at where these teams are sitting, and I'm going to check down here. And Twitch chat is mostly in the favor of Team Omega Snipe. So clearly some NA bias in our chat. But Skyline D right now, they're kind of making some people eat their words, eat their votes. And, you know, we talked about their run through the Chinese regional. It was perfect. It was undefeated. And certainly some of the other teams had critiques in terms of their speed. But thus far, it looks like they've found a way to get some extra seconds back. And Jack, does this kind of line up with how you expected these teams to improve over the course of those off weeks?
Without a doubt, in terms of Skyline D, because it was such a long time ago with them being the first regional to actually start going and be able to see everybody else and prepare for the tournament. And one of the nicest things we saw about Skyline D specifically was with such a quick turnaround time from time trials to the first regional, they had pretty well executed strats throughout the entirety of the tournament, right? So when they're getting a month and a half, 2 months to be able to prepare for the LAN event that's coming up, you know, it should come as no surprise that they've improved drastically, right? What I'd be interested in seeing going here is how much they're going to rely on, you know, maybe Western strategies, or that they're going to try to focus on their own, and that'll be interesting seeing as they come up to the counter pick.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously they do have, or Team Omega Snipe rather, does have that counter pick. And this was another thing we discussed at length with the teams. And teams felt very confident that, look, you're supposed to win your counter pick. That's the map you've practiced. That's what you're expected to win. And, you know, for a lot of our series with some of these teams pretty evenly skilled, we have seen that. But certainly we have seen as well in this event, you know, Sours. Sometimes teams just come out and win your counter pick. You know, what are you looking at here for Team Omega Snipe? I know you talk to these guys a fair bit.
Yeah, so something really big out of Team Omega Snipe is Luffy is mainly known for his Resto Druid play, and he opted to go on to the Holy Paladin for the series, which is an interesting choice because that Resto Druid Typhoon is really useful for getting the mobs out of the Sanguine puddles. So they must have some high healer damage dungeons in mind for the upcoming series. There's some really good dungeons in this map pool. I know that they're very comfortable at, that they've been practicing a lot. Notably the Cathedral of Eternal Night, as well as the Eye of Azshara, I know they've put a lot of time into. And both of these dungeons, you know, they really complement, you know, that Holy Paladin damage. There's not a lot going on that the Paladin can also really just pump, especially in a 23 tyrannical Eye of Azshara. It should look really, really good.
Yeah, it looks like we are going to be going to Cathedral of Eternal Night, and this is certainly a map that we have seen teams have success on. It's one of those later maps that maybe not everyone got a ton of time to practice on. Certainly a stark contrast to Darkheart Thicket, again, one of those 7-0 rollouts. Ted, what do you make of this?
I'm not shocked to see this. We all did have a great opportunity to talk to these teams, and Cathedral is the one they stated that they're best versed in, and they had a lot of practice in the regionals. Not to mention that this time, if the teams do move on to that kind of grand final stage, it is a forced map, if I'm not mistaken, at the end. So it's a map that the teams really have to practice, and they feel comfortable with it, so here we go. But this is also the team that said earlier, Jack, remember we talked to them, that they're very worried if they lose that first map. They put in a lot of investment in that first win. Nonetheless, let's take a look here at Cathedral.
Yeah, you see Luffy on the right side of your screen here, using his invisibility potion, using, of course, the fastest speed set that he has possible to be able to make sure he's blitzing his way through all these mobs and make sure that he's going to be able to skip ahead. That'll be the interesting thing to see as you're seeing Skyline D, for example, having everybody in range. You're able to see everyone there, whereas Luffy is running ahead to make sure they're able to have that larger skip. But what you will be seeing is, of course, Luffy going up to the very top, going up into Agronox's room, make sure that he's going to be able to get into position to be able to res the rest of his team using Mass Resurrection, where they'll be right below him, getting the res off and skipping a ton of trash along the way here. Skyline D here is just working on the last of course, the mini-boss and all the additional trash here, and as you're seeing, Omega Snipe taking the nice leap of faith.
And just to mention, of course, we do not have Sanguini Panini Weenie on the map right now. It's actually quaking and bolstering. We do have that bolstering showing up again for the mobs, for the teams, so we're going to have to see exactly how their strategies rely on pulling some of these mobs with the bosses, if they even choose to do that. One of the opportunities being here for Agronox, the first boss, as he does have a lot of flowers in his room, but he is accessible immediately, Jack. As you mentioned, we do see the kind of stealth run that we typically saw in a lot of the regional phases, especially for Europe and NA, running up, doing the res and doing the skip. Now, the risky thing here, Jack, as we've talked about many times, is if they die, the only checkpoint in this dungeon is all the way back at the start, so it's really risky play here from them right now.
Yeah, at this point, it is that all-in move with going onto them, but at this point, especially when we've talked to them in the past, they have to go all in. They have to be able to put everything out into the table here, because we've seen sometimes in the past, especially in the regional stage, some teams that didn't quite make it, didn't quite get back to didn't quite make it out of the group stage, really just played a little too safe, and they really played a little too secure. And when you're not able to see what the other teams are doing, you just have to put everything on the line here.
So unfortunately, we do have a fear go out for Skyline D, as they did pull that Bat Rider trash. You have to make sure you interrupt that. Cost 2 deaths, 3 deaths on the board now, as we saw that cheat death proc earlier, and the Rogue has released. We still have a death over from the DH, who has not opted to release. Eepel kind of running for his life here, does go down eventually, and we're going to have that perk proc on the tank, and Reigns will be going down as well. A full team wipe coming out of Skyline D on the side there, just because of that missed interrupt for the fear, so that's going to be devastating for them. Team Omega Snipe looking in a really prime position now to clean up the rest of this trash and get ready to pull Agronox.
Yeah, at this point, there's so much extra trash that they've taken care of, and of course, Mayu has to just interrupt his cast due to Quaking going out there, so it's a little bit of extra time wasted here, as Omega Snipe is going to be getting their first checkpoint when they have to be dealing with Agronox. You are having Hadrian going into Purgatory again, and it's very important to be able to watch out for this, because Agronox, even though we're not on a tyrannical setting, it still will be no joke in terms of the damage that can be pumped out into them, and even if, we're having a little bit of issues with ad control, a lot of things can kind of compound on each other, so those are really not the areas that you want to see any kind of Purgatory being procced.
Agronox now being pulled, of course, the Corrupted Tree full of Chlorophyll over on the side of Team Omega Snipe. Now, you notice how they pull it over to that middle area, that kind of fountain garden area, wanting to make sure that they get the Lashers that spawn on the side, which each fixate one player, funneling in and bottlenecking through the boss so that they can stun, CC, and slow them on top of the boss and effectively cleave them down. The Succulent Lasher, of course, that spawns on top of the boss. Particularly dangerous to the tank, does a lot of melee damage, and does do that succulent secretion that explodes for damage around the area. Usually you want to stun that, but as long as you move slightly out of its range, it shouldn't be of any harm.
Yeah, at this point, they were rotating through stuns to be able to make sure they're interrupting it when they can, but also just trying to make sure the area denial was as little as possible here. Skyline D is redoing the pull that had previously wiped them, making sure they're getting all the trash down. Evil is going down once again, and this is what we kind of wanted to see, or kind of wanted to look at, is
that
how well melee, well, not specifically, is how well melee is going to be able to respond to so many different, effects that are going to be going on, especially when Skyline D is opting for that triple melee composition.
There's a reason that a lot of teams skip the trash downstairs. It's not just because it's effective and it's kind of clever to use that res upstairs, because it is a 180-degree radius, three-dimensional for a sphere, if you will. But the biggest deal is that a lot of that trash is just so dangerous. It has frontal cleaves on the tank, turns around with that fell strike, just hits a lot of players, and we could see all these spot deaths plus that full white coming out of Skyline D. Team Omega Snipe downing Agronox now and getting ready to move over. Now, having done this, they have secured the next checkpoint in the dungeon. So should they wipe soon before the death of the next boss, they will not spawn at the beginning of the dungeon, rather over on Agronox.
Yeah, at this point, they're just grabbing some of the trash mobs from the left side of the room, making sure that they're getting everything in together here, as Skyline D is just kind of working on skipping ahead. You were seeing on the side of Skyline D, Reigns pulling a lot of those extra mobs to the side, and the rest of the team just skipping on through here because they did previously use their mass stealth for the side of Skyline D a little bit earlier to be able to skip past some earlier trash mobs. So at that point, that's why you had to see Mayu get everybody rezzed up here. But you are seeing a bunch of deaths coming out on the side of Omega Sniped, but again, the checkpoint is just right around the corner.
Yeah, but I mean, sloppy play right there. Zongo has his cheat death go off. We see I'm Fired Up go down. 5 deaths on the board for Team Omega Sniped. Of course, 4 of those were on purpose earlier in the dungeon, as the team did kind of get themselves killed to make sure that they get rezzed upstairs by the Holy Paladin. So an extra death there, plus the unavailability, Jack, it's early, of that cheat death for the Rogue. They do move upstairs. Now, a lot of tricky trash here in form of these imps. A lot of casts similar to the imps that we've seen in some of the other maps. You want to make sure you interrupt them, otherwise the tank will get nuked, similar to the ones in the Court of Stars. Plus, you have all these kind of candle holders on the side that you want to make sure you interrupt before they drop their books. And if they do drop their books, you want to make sure you get that stun out, especially on those arcane anomalies.
Yeah, extremely big pull coming out of it here on the side of Hadran. And keep in mind, he does not have Purgatory available to him, and this is going to be in a bolster setting. So having, this really tight situation, everyone dropping very low by stacking on each other with Quaking, but also having very high requirements for being able to have that single target damage onto the priorities, making sure that, Hadron immediately getting out as everything starts bolstering. Really good add damage, really good control on the side of Team Omega Sniped here, really preventing a lot of bolsters.
And we see that banish come out of Zyronic just before they started AoE, preventing one of those higher health scavengers from getting too many bolstering stacks, but likely also proccing the Cephas, which I would assume he's wearing at this point, and if not, then it did at least help with that CC. A lot of those books going down. We can see the Arcane Anomaly book on the left side of the screen there, not anymore, but it does disappear as they do cleave it down effectively, getting ready to pull Gazerax, the eyeball, kind of mini boss of the dungeon. Does a lot of damage once you are required to turn around, make sure you avoid his AoE hit, but then he pumps out a ton of damage on the group, Jack.
Yeah, at that point, you're really weighing, depending on the level of the key, whether you're going to be able to have everybody stacked up, whether you're going to try to have everything outranged, because you will be able to move just past 40 yards to be able to, dodge any of the extra damage that you'll be doing. But they are pulling Gazerax in with the rest of these little impacts to be able to pump out a little bit more single target damage here. This is probably where you're going to see CDs coming out for Luffy to make sure he's keeping the entire group topped off here.
And the tank as well, as we see a lot of damage go out on Hadrian. There are a lot of those imp casts getting off. The eyeball boss doing so much damage. We're really going to have to keep an eye on how things unfold here. But this mob, the Gazerax, can be buffed by bolsters, so they have to make sure not to kill the scavengers and the imps who have substantially lower health than Gazerax first. Otherwise, they're going to have a wipe situation on their hands. Of course, haven't forgotten about Skyline D on the left side of the screen as they just wrap up their Bloodlust. 46% now in Agronox. I mean, they got their work cut out for them. They've been set back quite significantly with no huge advantage to Trash.
Yeah, we've seen a Holy Avenger going up for Luffy, as you are seeing Zongo going down, Luffy going down. There are so many bolsters that were like really close to happening. I think it only took a couple bolsters to make sure that Zongo and Luffy were going down. It was a little bit of a delay getting Holy Avenger out there, though, to be able to be properly prepared. And not everybody was completely topped off going into it. So I would have kind of liked to see maybe a little bit better preparation or more preemptive to try to preempt some of that damage there. But they are able to mop up the rest of these mobs. You are seeing Thrash Fight coming down here. So it's not too bad of a catch-up that they have to do, but that's a little thing, especially on their counter pick, that you really just hate to see.
Brother Smash Fight, if we did the research correctly, if I remember from previous weeks. Now, we do see those Arcane Anomaly books getting bolstered there by the remaining mobs, but Zyronic doing well to spot fear them, making sure.
Good do those research for Thrash Bite.
No, it's Thrash Bite. I said he's brother of Smash.
Oh, his brother of Smash Bite, yeah.
Talk about this at home. But we do see Thrash Bite being pulled here. A lot of damage coming into that AoE area. Still residual damage on the group, but if you are caught in that zone, it does a ton of damage and punts you back should you survive that. Main mechanic to this boss really being that he will fixate one of the players and run into a bookcase, spawning 2 extra tomes. We all know Thrash Bite hates reading, so to prevent this, you can actually immune. In this case, you do have the bop advantage coming out of the Holy Paladin, as we see that go up on Zyronic right now. Eats it in the middle, no bookcase is destroyed, and of course no books have spawned as a result. And based on their damage, that's probably going to be the only charge they get this fight.
Yeah, at this point they're able to so rapidly neutralize Thrash Bite here. Also saving the books, saving knowledge, which we all want to be able to cherish here. As Skyline D is just now starting to deal with Thrash Bite's room, and they're going much smaller, of course, than their opponents here. So I think this is really a big point here. Is Omega Sniped? This is their counter pick. They want to be making more, be playing more cleanly. But when they're going to be at the disadvantage, if they're going to be able to win this. They want to make sure that they're at least able to kind of calm their nerves down. They're able to kind of get into the flow that they need to, because once they start getting rolling, as we've seen in the NA regionals, they're just able to tear through teams.
So this is going to be an interesting pull here, because oftentimes teams filter about the 80% of the mobs that run out and go to the portal. They filter them together, CC them, and place down a ring of peace to prevent them. But they have to be really careful here with that bolstering. If they mismanage the damage on this mass amount of mobs, they're going to end up with some massive imps on their hand that could easily wipe the group. The only 5 group that will not despawn is the left side of the screen there, the 3 Hellblaze imps plus the scavengers. Those you actually have to fight. Everything else in this room tries to run up the stairs like a coward and disappear into the Cathedral of Night.
Yeah, at this point, they're just getting themselves well set up here. They are having, of course, that banish going out to be able to proc the Sephuz here, getting everything tightly grouped in together. You know, they're having very strong positioning. I like the positioning as Ironic here, making sure he's at the top of the stairs. He was getting there very quickly with his lock gate, making sure that they're able to get everything all in together as the group is going to be following up with them, making sure they're getting that stun there just to be able to neutralize them as rapidly as possible, and they're pulling this off phenomenally.
Yeah, that was great. So he did actually have leg sweep instead of the Ring of Peace, so he got that stun in that 5-second stun right away, finishing them off. Really bolstered mobs there, so a couple of them do leak through the portal, unfortunately. Now, I'm not sure if Team Omega Snipe planned for a few of them to leak by accident. We do see that pre-banished mob coming out now as they cleave it, or they DPS it down, getting ready to move upstairs to the spider area. You know, they're going to have to account for that, because we have talked to them in the past and some other teams who have missed a couple of % on this map, and their excuse was always a couple of those imps leaked through the portal. So about 4 of them leaked there, so we're going to have to see if they pull extra or if they had this planned all along. Only 10% left on the board for them. They should easily be able to make up the rest of the trash between this room and, of course, the 4 bats that spawn after Dominatrix, the 3rd boss.
And at this point, they're making sure they're getting the sap out onto the Enforcer there, skipping around, and you probably see the sap might switch gears into that Orb Caster if they don't want to have to worry about it there. There it is. It goes out right there. They are going to be able to get about 4.5 or 5% from some of the bats at the top after they kill the 3rd boss here. So this should be able to wrap up just enough of their trash. So it looks like it was good planning on their part, knowing that some mobs, especially in a bolstered situation, would kind of get through and escape to the portal here. So it looks like it's going to be very good trash percentage here out of Omega Sniped.
Lashley getting pulled to the side. Now all the players are grouped up on top of her for 2 reasons. One is you don't want her to blink to one of the players that's too far away and then start doing her frontal, as you do get slowed when she blinks, making it very difficult to get out of the way of the frontal. So doing well here to group up, but the other advantage, of course, being the patrol that eventually will lose its sap CC. If they fail to re-CC it, it will pat quite close to where they are. No problem for them here, and Hadrian does manage to kind of get away from these spiderlings that do a ton of damage, especially with that poison dot that they stack up. Luffy, of course, having that relief every 8 seconds with the Dispel for the poison, but nonetheless, they will do a ton of damage. As we can see, Hadrian already copying a more defensive playstyle here, kiting the spiders around in circles as they start to get bolstered, and will soon head up the stairs as they reach that lower health.
Yeah, he really doesn't want to have to use extra cooldowns. He really doesn't want to use, for example, any of his Purgatory here, because you will be having to deal with the next boss, which would be very dangerous. A lot of big threats there, and you are actually seeing the Dispel coming out of Fired Up here, making sure he's able to get the poison spell out onto Hadrian. It's such a nice little bit of extra utility that can come out for the rest of the team to make sure that that can happen as Luffy was upstairs, starting some of the RP event to be able to spawn that first boss, as Skyline D is just now getting halfway through Thrashbite.
Yeah, I mean, Skyline D, since their hiccup, they've performed very well, but it just set them back so far, especially for Team Omega tonight. This is their map. This is their pick. This is their favorite map, the one that they come out strong with, the one that when we talk to them, this they said is their strongest map, and they're showing why that's the case as they move upstairs and get ready for Dominatrix, the 3rd boss of the dungeon, which is available to them as we speak. Now, about this boss, at 90 and 50%, he will spawn 2 portals, one of them, the first set of 2 being near the entrance of the room, which will continue to pour imps out, and if the portal guardian, the little fire elemental that you'll see, is not killed by the time he finishes that approaching Doom cast, it will spawn a larger kind of Felguard elemental that does a ton of damage to the group. So you want to make sure to control these mobs. And the imps, of course, nothing to scoff at. They do a ton of damage. That cast hits for about 4 or 5 mil, and the tank needs to grab it too. Melee's quite hard as well, but we do see that Vanish come out from Zyronic as one of the imps is controlled on the side, and the first 2 Portal Guardians are well dealt with.
Yeah, and you're seeing Luffy actually helping out Zyronic onto that second portal ad, making sure that they're going to be able to just get those down together and that the rest of the melee doesn't actually have to move around in the process here. We are seeing as they went into the Aegis of Agrimar here, you're dealing a little bit less damage to everybody. You're also dealing less healing. So at that point, it's okay even if you have Quaking going out. You're actually not going to be hurting yourselves that much at all here. And they're just now getting to the 50% mark right after the Chaotic Energy went out. So they're quickly able to get onto the next portal side without having to worry about any of the casts going out from the boss.
These mistresses come up right now from the side. Now, the danger about them, especially right now during the chaotic energy, is that these mistresses will do an AoE shadow cleave that will punt players out of the area. So you want to make sure not to stack them at the shield in the middle of the room, as they do have the potential to kind of hit the players out of that safe area right before that chaotic energy go out, and that would lead to a rather chaotic situation if I do say so. But they are dealt with. The Portal Guardians are down. Only 2 mistresses left. They cleave them down effectively, and Domitrax will be entering his soft enrage phase in just a moment, where he will increase his attack speed and damage on the tank slightly. Already hitting pretty hard, as you can see Hadrian getting some chunked health there, but should be no problem for them to finish this boss off. Skyline D doing their pulls right now as they've downed Thrashbite and are working their way up to the 3rd boss.
Yeah, at this point, they're just playing a lot more safely here. They're getting, their mistress down, but they've kept it up for such a long time to allow Zongo to get that Shuriken Storm in, get the extra combo points out, funnel in more single target damage here. But it's phenomenal control out of the group to make sure that they're not impeding each other's damage, not actually, hurting each other's single target damage by, spamming a little bit of extra AoE on the side here, and they've just set up such a phenomenal advantage for themselves here.
So the 4 bats, the Dreadwings, do come down from the windows. Now the final percentage that Team Omega Snipe needs prior to Mephistroth spawning the final boss of the dungeon. Not the most dangerous boss in the world. They will have to deal with 1 phase 2 rotation at their DPS level in this 23. But as long as the tank keeps that shield going well, and we'll talk about that in a second, should be of no concern to them. Of course, they will not have that Bloodlust available. As we see, they have 4 minutes and 30 seconds on that cooldown for them. Skyline D now dealing with Nalasha, getting ready to move up to Domitrax. 1 minute left on their Bloodlust, rather, not Battle.
I love seeing the positioning out of Hadrian as he was kiting those bats away. He was actually dipping in and out of melee range to be able to get some extra damage out onto them, then running out before the Shadow Strike went out. So it creates a nice consistency for the rest of the DPS, where they're not just immediately having to run a whole great distance and then catch up and then stop or anything like that. So really great control as they're going on in Mephisroth here. But you are seeing right off the pull, one of the Spires is getting spawned into melee. You really want to see Luffy standing a little bit further out to be able to kind of bait those away.
The problem is he does want to take advantage of his damage and, of course, his mastery, increasing the healing on that melee, so that's why you see him piling in there. But, of course, the cost of that will be the Spire spawn in the melee areas. It will target 2 non-tank units, usually preferring ranged, but, of course, we do know Holy Paladins are considered a melee unit. We do see Fang go down on the left side, and Purg proc over for the Blood DK for Skyline D. Looking a bit of a sloppy pull, it's something that we saw Hadrian be so defensive about with the remaining Spiders after Nalasha, has cost Skyline D just a bit of health there, and they're only at 81% trash, so that's going to be really interesting for them. They're going to have to kill the 3rd, 4th boss and hightail it back through the dungeon. It's phase 2 here for Team Omega Sniped, as the tank Hadrian there protects Illidan, the blind, obviously, from the middle area, from those purple balls from the side, from the images. If any of them hit, it will extend the phase jack with that increasing damage.
I'm seeing better saves here than the World Cup right now, as Hadrian's doing an excellent job holding on to the shield here, defending Illidan and making sure they're able to get through this phase so rapidly here. Great plays.
One of those balls does hit Hadrian, but we are out of this phase as the remaining images despawn, and Mephistroth himself reveals himself as the teams get prepared to go through phase 1 again. Now this phase 1, the first one that you encounter in the fight, he's at about 60 energy already, so it lasts 40 seconds, usually perfect for Bloodlust, of course, which is not available to them. This one he starts at 0 energy, so they should be very comfortably able to kill the remaining percentage on Mephistroth and tie this series up in just a moment, as he will not enter another second phase. They just need to keep a good head about them.
Yeah, at this point, they've done such an excellent job to be able to make sure they have that strong positioning. And last time that we actually saw Omega Sniped in Cathedral was when they actually had fired up onto the mage here. So it really goes to show, as they're adapting their compositions, is they're looking at how they can edit their strategies from the regionals to this point. The extra confidence being able to bring in the double melee here that's worked so well for them going into the series, and this has got to be the big confidence boost for them.
I mean, that's just it. And we've said this 100 times already, so let's make it 101. This is the map that they said is their biggest strength, the one that they feel best trained with. But my biggest concern, really, a lot of the teams we talked to said, obviously main strategies, if we've kind of seen this theme of this MDIB, is that we can hear some clapping in the background right now. That is not Jack, just so you know at home. That is actually Team Omega Snipe. But the biggest concern I have that we're going to talk about later, and Rob, I'm sure you'll mention this as well, is really the fact that they were banking on that first map win. So there's a huge advantage going into Skyline D into the 3rd game.
For sure, there are other obstacles to be tackled, but for now, Team Omega Snipe stays on the board. They get that all-important first win in the series, looking very good on their pick. Will this persist, though? We will have to see after the break, or will Skyline D be able to close it out on their pick? you're keeping score, that's now 2 straight for the alliances. I just want to point out we're currently winning, so sorry guys. We do have a tie game though when it comes to our actual series here. Team Omega Sniped was able to bust out their counter pick and get the win over Skyline D. Now, Sloot, you brought it up before we went into break. When we interviewed all these teams, most of them were pretty sure, like, okay, if we don't win that first map that we've really been practicing for, we're in dire straits. But I think Team Omega sniped even more than the other teams, with the exception of Hadrian, which is pretty much like, yeah, we lose if we don't win that first map. So, you know, now they're at that point where they have to kind of overcome. They're definitely in a deficit situation.
You said it. We've said it a few times, and 102 now. You know, we'll talk about this again. It's just we had a chance to sit down with all these teams. Unfortunately, not the ones in China. They weren't able to join us here. They're at their own LAN in Shanghai. But you know, we talked to them, and of all 6 teams that we managed to talk to, it really seemed that Team Omega Sniped was the most uncomfortable about losing that first match. It seems like they banked a lot of their strategy in winning that first and third, as we've seen in the tournament, beyond any other team. Now, there was a bit of disagreement amongst the team, as you said, with Hadrian. He was confident that that wouldn't be a problem, but, you know, we'll see. I mean, now they're in that situation that they hated to be in.
Now, as we said, though, they did get a first win, and obviously that's what really matters here, is just keeping the series alive. Certainly there is a lower bracket, and they're no stranger to it, but that's not really how you want to start your day given the choice. Sours, what did we see them really do well in their pick on Cathedral?
They were just executing all of their pools incredibly well. We didn't see any of like the slop that we may have seen at the end of their extremely long day during the regionals, where they had like a 12-hour day of constant games. And so here we're looking at the really big pool after the second boss, and just how well they executed this pool. They come into this with really high kill count. They get excellent grip off, and they stun everything perfectly. See the leg sweep going for full duration. The DFA, everything's going really cleanly, and everything starts to die really evenly, which is the most important thing to do with this bolstering affix. Of course, these low health mobs may look low health, but when they have enough bolstering stacks, they could have just as much health as a full HP mob. And so they do a really good job cleaning up here. We see kill count go 74, 80, and it keeps on climbing up and up. And when Skyline D attempted this same pool later, when they finally got up to this point, they hit that 74% kill count mark, and they stayed there, and they didn't go past it. So Omega Sniped just executing everything so cleanly in this dungeon, showing that Skyline D is in fact human, and you know, this is the first game that they've dropped in this entire tournament, and it was done here by our boys, Team Omega Sniped.
Yeah, I mean, all of our boys here are our boys. We're not just rooting for the North American boys, okay? We love all the boys. But, Jack, first map loss now for Skyline D. Do you feel like in this situation, at this level, that is going to potentially set them back and is going to potentially mess with their mindset, or do we feel like they're probably good?
Obviously, they're very good, right, without a doubt. But it also kind of highlights what I kind of mentioned before the series, is how much is Skyline D going to take away from Western teams? What are they really looking at as they're able to analyze these? And as you saw, like almost every single Western team who was having extremely good Cathedral times was kind of having that, you know, that leap of faith, having everybody dying at the start, having their healer running ahead to be able to, you know, get the res off to them. So them not actually going into that, I think is a pretty strong point for Omega Sniped as they're going into the next pick, where they say, oh yeah, like Skyline D is going to pick this next, but they may not actually have as well-refined strategies as the rest of the other regions.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to see what Skyline D chooses again. They're just going to have such a momentous advantage as we have seen over the course of this tournament with that third map pick. For Team Omega Snipe, as we said, they weren't necessarily looking super comfortable, but okay, I's going to be the third pick here, and I would say so far is the standout map of this tournament in terms of how people have approached it. Sours, what do you make of this pick?
So Azshara is kind of an interesting pick, but at the same time, a little bit expected. This is the losers round of 4, the first round of the lower bracket map. So this is a map, of course, that this team is going to be very practiced on. It's something that we did talk about earlier. There are new affixes in the Azshara this time around. Say goodbye to the explosive orbs. We are now dealing with skittish, necrotic, tyrannical in Azshara. And so we talked about how that last boss, tyrannical, it may only be a 23, but it's very scary in here.
Speaking of scary, this is going to be the first time we're actually seeing skittish in this tournament. Obviously, that's new to the Global LAN Finals. Ted, what's it like being skittish?
Are you asking about the game or me myself?
We're going to go with the game for the purposes of, I think, this broadcast being rated PG.
I mean, since we have, of course, this relatively new affix, at least to the MDI world for those at home, what this means, it won't be an easily visually detectable affix, but what it does is it reduces the overall threat that the tank produces on the on anything in this dungeon, really. So a lot of the big pulls that you might see teams do where the tank kind of gets a bit of aggro, starts to run away, could provide a bit of complexity, if you will, or danger perhaps for the rest of the team as they kind of get some more threat with their damage and on the mobs. Necrotic, of course, Jack, nobody's any stranger to, especially the healer and tank, as increasing stacks will decrease the amount of healing and absorb that the tank can get on them by 3% per stack. So, of course, when you reach that 34 stacks, you are literally unhealable.
Yeah, but at this point, you are seeing Omega Snipe pulling everything into Parjesh here. They are just getting that first pack that is kind of just guarding Parjesh very closely here, getting it all in. And like you said, having to deal with Necrotic, especially when you're pulling extra mobs into the boss, is going to add so many extra hazards for them to deal with to be able to actually get through. So they are popping Bloodlust here, and it's very important to be able to make sure they're able to maximize as much damage as Zongo can, while still making sure that Hadron is going to be able to drop his stacks cleanly and efficiently.
So Skyline D opting to kill the trash prior to engaging Warlord Parjesh, but we do see that Bloodlust come up on their side as well, as Team Omega Sniped on the right side is just finishing up with theirs. 15 seconds left on the timer for that. The trash getting cleaned up now. Unlike the two maps that we saw before this, there is no more bolstering, meaning that they can freely kill the mobs as quickly as they want to cut out some of that danger. Skittish, as long as the tank is providing a ton of damage, will be able to hold aggro onto them. As we do know, of course, for just those at home, threat is just damage done by the tank times a multiplier. So the easy way to overcome the Skittish affix is to just play more offensively and gear more offensively as the tank.
Yeah, at this point you are seeing, 50% was the mark where Bloodlust had faded away for Omega Sniped here. As you're seeing, Skyline D just a little bit behind because they were not actually pulling all those extra mobs into the boss. They weren't actually getting all that extra cleave damage that Omega Snipe was actually able to take advantage of. So while there is a little bit of disparity in terms of trash percentage here, it looks like Omega Snipe is really coming out strong in this dungeon.
No, we did see typically from the EU and NA teams is that after Parjesh falls for Team Omega Sniped here, they do kind of a big pull with all the Naga surrounding the area. Some teams actually have quite some trouble with that, so we'll have to see how they pull it off, especially with the Necrotic. Now, it's not too bad the Necrotic, the tank can just run away to reset the stacks as long as they provide enough threat, especially under this skittish circumstance that they have to deal with. Parjesh now down to 16% after that huge DFA for Team Omega Snipe. Should be falling quickly as they deal with the two mobs on the side, wanting to make sure, of course, that you leave one of the two mobs alive, usually the Crest Rider, so that they can eat the spear to the face and not have one of the players deal with it, and of course not having to use that bot for no reason in this tyrannical setting.
And they do a very good job making sure that they're able to kind of get away from the rest of those mobs here. You do still have to watch out for the dot that went out just before the boss had actually ended up dying here. So you are going to see a couple extra heals going out onto Zyronic, making sure that he's going to be topped off before they start moving on to the next trash packs here. We are going to be seeing an interesting route coming out as they're going to be going actually to the left side rather than moving on into the direction of Lady Haycoil.
Yeah, I haven't seen this route, honestly, since early beta and Legion, when most teams would just kind of go this way. There's a lot of danger in the kind of cave that they're going to on the side. There's one of the giants that they have to deal with, which teams usually kind of opt to skip at all costs. We are in that tyrannical setting, so the trash is not really as dangerous, so not too surprising to see some kind of new strats and pulls. We'll have to see how this works out for Team Omega Snipe. Skyline D has now downed Parjesh and will re-stealth past that group of three that they jumped past earlier to engage Parjesh, and they're going down more of a traditional route, moving over to the left side of the instance.
There's got to be a very good part of, of extra confidence that we're seeing out of the side of Omega Snipe where, yes, this was not their pick, but they already have some very interesting strategies coming up that we have not actually seen in the MDI yet before.
And of course, as we pay attention, we do have Skittish here, and we do see that the logo representing Skittish down in the bottom of the map has disappeared, as much of the mobs do with their Skittish and their threat. Zyronic does go down here, though, so a bit of damage and threat coming out to them. Unhealable amount of stacks on Hadron as he will go down too. It looks like this is a purposeful wipe, I would assume, here on the side as they kind of run through, and we do see that failure detection pylon going down. So indeed, this was intended. They save that extra death from Zongo, who can just safely stealth through everything, saving the 5 seconds. Will res everybody up safely on the other side of the dungeon, or maybe they won't actually. It looks like they kind of failed with the failure detection pylon, so obviously the pylon was not working properly. So we're going to have to see what their plan B here is, if they're just going to kind of end up doing it again, but that is going to cost them a bunch of time, and it's just allowing Skyline D with this more traditional route on the left side of the screen, as we see it puffed up here on the main monitor, getting ready to deal with those two Arcanists, which will spawn the Lady Hate Coil.
And at this point, they are just making sure they're able to neutralize all these mobs. You are seeing, like you said, that kind of traditional pull as they're pulling all the Gilbins that they can to make sure they're bringing them back again into the Arcanist when they're going to be able to get everything neutralized in together. And that's the thing you've always been able to see. And, one of the most fun parts of Azshara, when you're able to get these very, very large trash pulls in, have everybody neutralize them as rapidly as possible here. But it's also the skittish and also the extra danger there. So you might actually see, the tank start getting some distance here when all the mobs are breaking out of their Chaos Nova here, but also having to watch out for on the side of just the triple favorable melee composition here, any of the mobs are going to be, just dropping their threat and just start trying to whack the melee here. So really good control inside of Skyline.
So a bit more trouble coming out of Team Omega sniped on the right side as Ironic does go down. They're dealing with some of the trash in that cave right now, including that giant, which does quite a bit of damage AoE, but also the stun during all the trash being surrounded. So a bit of danger towards the tank there. Skyline D doing an excellent job. Now both teams have an advantage to kind of counter this skittish that we didn't mention yet, Jack, in the rogues. The rogues will provide that tricks of the trade, which redirects all of their threat for 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, onto the tank, meaning that some of these big pulls, especially at the start, will be a lot easier for the tank, and they're kind of able to start kiting a bit earlier should it be too dangerous, like with that Mass Gilbin pull that we just saw.
Yeah, it really shows just how well they're able to actually, control all the trash and be able to make sure that they're not going to be able to get any extra percentages here. Also very nice, that you don't have to deal with any of the fortified hydras here, which can just deal tons and tons of damage, especially as you're unable to actually heal yourself as the necrotic stacks start going up. But you're seeing on the side of Mayu here, getting very good positioning to start face pulling a lot of the other trash. That way he's able to stay mounted up here, grabbing everything, bringing it all in together there. That way, the second that they're done with the Hydra, they don't actually have to move to be able to encounter any other mobs. They're just simply able to get on top of the next set and start progressing further and getting ready for Lady Hatecoil.
Yeah, I mean, just really excellent, clean play here from them. Excellent done by Maya, and it just shows as well the strength of that Blood DK being able to handle themselves with the support of the team, getting ready to peel any of the trash that would kind of not allow those necrotic sets to, necrotic stacks, to reset. Team Omega Snipe dealing with that double giant pull right before King Deepbeard. One of the more dangerous pulls that we often see teams just skip entirely with the boat skip, or either pulling to the side and everybody runs through. So interesting to see them deal with it. I guess they're feeling more confident in this tyrannical setting, but we do see another cheat death proc for Zongo there. Luckily no death on the board, but he won't have that security later. Skyline D, I mean, Miyu's just running circles around all these crabs, but they didn't end up going for Lady Hatecoil. Rather, they are working their way towards Serpentrix, who of course was knighted in England recently.
Is that so? Yeah, at this point, you have to look at when you're going to be using your Bloodlust, and ideally in a tyrannical format, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to have Bloodlust available for, of course, Lady Hatecoil. So at this point, you're able to kind of weigh your options, whether you want to go right to Serpentrix here or, without using Bloodlust, or if you want to be able to clear as much trash and just get all of your trash percentage until Bloodlust comes back, and then engage with Lady Hatecoil here. So it'll be interesting to see, how long they're going to be able to take with the rest of this trash, because they have mopped up almost all of the board here that they're going to really need. So at this point, you are seeing Evil going down. How much do they actually need to be, and how long is it really going to take for them to take down Serpentrix before they move on to Hatecoil?
Serpentrix, indeed. A team of Vegas Knights working on King Deepbeard on the right side of the screen, so very opposite pathing from these two teams right now. The more unconventional route going definitely in the way of Team Omega Snipe. Not something we see teams do, but this tournament, this weekend here, so we're going to see a lot of this creativity flair from the groups as they've tried and practiced to death a lot of these strategies. So it should be in their wheelhouse here. It could be any team's game right now, but certainly looking a bit more advantageous for Skyline D, as they're already at 85% of trash. So they're probably just going to bang out these two bosses and get ready to move upstairs to Deepbeard with that boat skip, Jack.
Yeah, at this point, about halfway through, or almost halfway through King Deepbeard as Skyline D is engaging with Serpentrix here. But like you said, the trash percentage makes a world of difference as we're going on to this. So you would be expecting Omega Snipe to just be taking some very large risks here, because at this point, there is not really much of a death disparity going on. So at this point, it's going to be a lot on how well they're going to be able to pull. Or sorry, there's a bit more of a death disparity, but it's going to be a lot on how they're going to be able to pull the trash quickly and efficiently.
Right, you are. And I would say in terms of efficiency, there's definitely a bit of efficiency lost with those two giants in favor of Skyline D that Team Omega Snipe decided to pull. Now, let's talk a bit about these bosses real quick before they disappear forever from our monitors. King Deepbeard on the right side, of course, will do that quake on the team, which will kind of spawn an area under the team, under each player, and you want to make sure you move out of that fissure, because 5 seconds later it will pulse for an immense amount of damage. So you want to make sure that you're kind of baiting it to save some of the real estate in the area. Players will also have those absorb bubbles cast on them, and if you don't take enough damage to break the bubble, it will hit the entire ult for the remaining amount of absorb on the bubble. Nightmare as usual, Jack. Otherwise, there's just a frontal on the tank, a frontal area that they can easily move out of, no problem there. And Serpentrix has his own nightly duties as well with his abilities, Jack, if you want to run through those.
Yeah, that's right. And you're seeing a lot of the puddles that are being dropped onto the different players here. It's very important to make sure that they're able to just either slowly kite them out, or even if you wanted to just stand in that same spot, they don't actually ramp up in terms of damage here. So if you're able to just slowly get everything pretty well stacked up together, reduce any of the area effect that they really have to worry about here, makes it a lot easier, especially when we're melee competition, for everybody to get around and actually reduce the damage going out. There will also be 2 transition phases as we're entering the second one of those, where Serpentrix will spawn, the Arcane and the Blazing Hydra heads. You will have to, of course, interrupt the Enrage that's going out by Serpentrix, but then, of course, killing each of the heads on the side, keeping them stunned or interrupted to reduce the damage going out on the group, and then going back into Serpentrix there.
Well, you know what they say, Jack, 3 heads are better than 1. The Arcane one being of particular danger to the team, as it will cast Arcane Blast on a member, and every successful cast will increase its damage done, eventually one-shotting one of the members. So you want to make sure to kick, interrupt, whatever you need to do to it, silence it, to just keep it locked down. The teams have killed the 2 remaining heads. The team, rather, has to kill the 2 remaining heads for Skyline D, and Serpentrix will be soon falling. Keep in mind, though, for those at home, they do have to double back and go back to Lady Haycoil. Jack, as you well pointed out earlier, their Bloodlust is just about to come off cooldown, almost perfectly, quite frankly, as they will move over and use it on Lady Haycoil, which in this tyrannical setting, I would say is one of the scarier bosses in here with that Focused Lightning.
Yeah, at that point, especially in the tyrannical, like you said, you really have to be rotating through defenses at around a 23, making sure that, everyone has the tools that they need to be able to survive, maybe playing a little bit more defensive here to be able to have some classes using Pride Heads if they really need it. But ideally, if you're able to have everybody, and as offensive gear as possible, that's going to be the ideal. But Omega Sniper has so much that they need to be able to catch up on here. As Serpentrix goes down, they're at 90% in terms of trash percentage, and then Omega Sniper is not even halfway there.
Team Omega Snipe still dealing with a quite big pull here right now. Keep an eye on him. Start on the necrotic setting, and Hadrian does not have that perg available as he just kind of runs around making sure to dodge all of these lightning areas, making sure to reset his stacks as well. Now, the Hydras themselves don't move as quickly as some of the other mobs, but they can't be slowed by a lot of the traditional means, so you want to make sure you build a really good distance between yourself and them to reset your stacks if he does not have that anti-magic shell available to him on a 1-minute cooldown. Could be using the Legendary Cloak, which extends the duration of that AMS to 10 seconds, perfectly overlaying the necrotic stacks. Not sure if he's wearing that right now, but it's possible that he will, especially for this pull, just swapping it out quickly. Skyline D has now pulled Lady Hatecoil on the left side, the big screen here, and as we can see, indeed did use their Bloodlust.
Yeah, at that point, it's very important to make sure that you're watching out for the 2 basic big mechanics. You just saw the Focused Lightning going out there, which you should stand away from the sandbars. That way you're not going to be able to destroy those. Then in just a second, you're going to be able to have, the other AoE that's going to be, electrifying all the water around, where you're having the Static Nova, and you want to make sure that everybody's standing on those sandbars to avoid any of the extra lightning, and which will also stun you. So very important to make sure you're kind of keeping all these adds alive as long as possible, just so that MGT is going to be able to keep up that damage. But again, you do have to still worry about the necrotic stacks here.
And that's exactly what I want to mention, Jack. And I also wanted to mention that you want to stay away from other players with that Focused Lightning, as you've taught me, unfortunately, a few times, that it will clip other people around you. But that's just it. The necrotic here is kind of a double-edged sword. They want to get that extra single target damage out of leaving those globules alive, especially in favor of the rogue. Well, not in favor of everyone almost, but rogue especially, getting a lot of those combo points from that AoE onto the adds. But, the double-edged sword here is that there will be a lot of necrotic stacks on the tank, and you can see really well there the previous Static Nova before this. I like what they're doing again right here is they put that Ring of Peace down, allowing the adds, or disallowing the adds to have access to the tank during that Static Nova when they're locked to an island, and decreasing the amount of necrotic stacks. So really clever play here by Skyline D.
Yeah, I really like the extra control, and they even rotated through Typhoon as well to make sure that when they didn't quite have Ring of Peace available to them, or they didn't have the Chaos Nova available to them to actually rotate through it, they had something to kind of keep the distance, as Rain was doing a great job being able to drop his necrotic stacks, and they're just absolutely melting this boss here, as Serpentrix is only at 50% here for Team Omega Sniped.
Yeah, they still have to deal with his second phase, of course. Some teams do opt to skip the 2 heads in the second phase and just try to burn the boss down from 33. A bit more dangerous to do in this tyrannical setting, but Lady Hatecoil going down to 2% now, about to fall here for Skyline D. 10% trash left on the board for them. I believe you need a 92% though before killing the last 4 mobs, which will give you access to Wrath of Azshara. So they do have a bit more damage to do here, probably 1 or 2 mobs left. They have marked a skull on that crab up ahead. Not sure if they're planning on dealing with it, after which we will see them do the traditional, or what has become traditional, boat skip leading up to King Deepbeard.
Yeah, at this point, they really are putting themselves closer to the boat, making sure they're going to be able to deal with that quickly, get Deepbeard down. They might opt to actually pull maybe one of the seagulls that's up there, or maybe one of the snails to be able to get a little bit extra cleave damage off onto the boss there. We'll have to see, but with the snail and the triple melee composition, it actually can be quite problematic having to actually have the frontal AoE going out for it, so it'll be interesting to see what they do here. Also, a big point to watch out for is that Omega Sniped is not going to have Bloodlust available to be able to take on Hatecoil, so that fight will last quite a bit longer longer, and they will have to actually, have a lot more attrition healing going out into the fight.
Yeah, it'll be quite dangerous as Skyline D just does now engage King Deepbeard here. They still have 90% on the board, so they will have to kill one more mob. Now, it will be pretty easy for them to kind of pull something with the remaining 4 mobs, or if I'm not mistaken, I saw the snail on the side of the room there aggroed. Not sure who's going to actually end up handling that, or if it was a purposeful aggro nonetheless. They start chewing through King Deepbeard's health here, down to 83% already, as Serpentrix is going down for Team Omega, sniped on the right side of the screen. And as you said, they will make their way over to Lady Heiko. Now, the problem is they're still lacking 36% trash, or minus the 8, let's say 28% that they still need to make up quickness, that they still need to make up for the rest of the dungeon before they even try to engage the final 4 mobs.
Yeah, and at this point you're seeing, what I also want to point out is the great positioning on the side of Skyline D here, because you will have the quaking that goes out regularly and puts down that extra zone that will then have an aftershock here. You want to be able to stack up all those quakings on top of each other and then moving away before the aftershock ends up hitting here, because all those aftershocks, if you stack 3 quakings onto the same spot, you're going to have 3 aftershocks going out at once here. So when you're having such a heavy emphasis on melee heavy compositions, you're going to see, that almost a full compass around the boss of their specific quaking areas and trying to make sure everyone's staying in the same spot as much as possible here.
Yeah, they want to play it as safe as possible, and they're doing really well right now. I mean, there's a lot of area to this map that they can kind of cover if needed, but you don't have to use it if they don't need to, and it does create some problems as the tank's running away. Sometimes a frontal comes up, as we can see there, that circle right now on Reigns, moves well out of it and back in onto his quaking spot. Team Omega sniped with a big pull, getting some of those Arcanists down. Keep in mind, they haven't even spawned the potential to get to Lady Hate Coil. That you do have to kill 2 of those Arcanists on the side, as we saw one of them go down now, and they're kind of backpedaling towards where most teams end up after Parjesh, over on the Arcanist and Snail area right now.
And right here you're seeing, I really like out of Mayu where he's actually holding aggro onto the Snail and kind of dragging it a little bit away from melee constantly, while still leaving it dotted up, while still contributing some damage into it, and ideally trying to keep it in range of maybe like the I-beam out of Fang or just any of the extra cleave damage that goes out. So it keeps it out of melee, it keeps it from dying immediately, but it also does an excellent job, at the expense of more positioning, more movement on the side of Mayu, to be able to make sure that that contribution is going out there. So I really like the play there.
And it's not too hard to move it around as it does move at snail's pace, just making sure it keeps around the boss for that cleave. We just saw, as you mentioned earlier, that I-beam clipping the edge of the snail as well. So really well done by them. I'm loving this out of Skyline D. I mean, the amount of coordination that they have between healer, tank, and group right now. The healer's running off, doing his own thing, trusting the rest of the group to stay alive, the tank to keep themselves alive, putting a hot or 2, a heal over time or 2 on the tank in the meantime, and just getting everything needed to go is just so clean here.
Yeah, and I love seeing actually the Snail was about to frontal the entire melee group there, because they actually had to coalesce and stack together after the quaking went out. But he did a great job actually hitting the Typhoon, get the grip in, get the asphyxiate onto the Snail there to make sure they're able to shut it down right as the boss goes down, and they're at perfect trash percentage.
I mean, that would be rather slimy if it did go off, but they do move over, just like yourself, so they do move over back to the casters leading up to the boss. Now, you can combine these together. The issue here is that there's a big space between these sorceresses here as they start to do just that. They are groupable, they are displaceable, of course, but there's a lot of interrupts that need to go out. We're not in a fortified setting, so should one of their casts get off, one of the lightning casts, the blast get off on one of the targets here, probably not an instant death, but they are kind of prepping them, and I like to see this slowly moving them towards the next mob and then pulling right away.
Yeah, you're seeing Hadrian actually going down here. They pulled all these extra mobs into the boss, and it looks like it was just it was a move that they just had to make, where they had to catch up onto trash percentage here, so they actually had to almost completely sacrifice Hadrian in order to do it, where if they were confident enough to be able to get all of those mobs down, they were able to actually have Hadrian go down during a static Nova, during a cast from the boss, get him quickly rezzed, get aggro back onto the boss, pick up the extra globules, which don't really deal too much melee damage, and then being able to kind of recover that pull. So it was a very risky move, but they executed it fairly well.
And they have to do it. They know where the other team's at this point. They do have access to a monitor with the stream, if I'm not mistaken, like we do, so they can see that they're behind at this point. And not only do they have just this surmounting lead that they have to catch up on with Skyline D, but we keep not talking about the fact that there's 25 seconds on the board in terms of deaths as well. So they had to do this. They had the battle reses available, as you said, Jack, and they just had to go for it. Put them in a more advantageous position, I would say, but they still have 57% on Lady Haycoil, while Skyline D is working on their last Enchantress before having access to the Wrath of Azshara, the final boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, right here you're seeing the last boss going down for them, as Mega Snipe is just at 50%, and at this point you do kind of have to hope for just the worst on the side of Skyline D for a Mega Snipe to be able to get back into this game here. And the 6 deaths, though, is just really killing them there, and a lot of it was kind of on the fact that their failure detection pylon just failed them. Where they were able to get the res out onto, of course, fired up. He'd be able to get everybody else up. He'd be able to start getting the group back into position here. But the fact that they didn't have their Shroud of Concealment from the Rogue, they weren't able to, again, skip past that larger giant mob. It actually just messed all of their trash percentages up. They had to be able to take so much extra time to be able to get back into the game there. It really was such a risky play and taking a unique route, but it really just ended up biting them at the end of it.
I mean, I'm sure it's something that they've well practiced and it just didn't work out for them. But Skyline D looking primed to take this series soon. Wrath of Azshara, of course, does start at 20%, but it does have the equivalent amount of raw HP to some of the other bosses in these dungeons. Important to note on this boss, there is a huge tank frontal, a huge area of denial that the tank and, of course, anybody else will have to move out of. There's also, Jack, that split damage that will go down on one player doing split physical damage. Now, you can immune it or try to CD through it, but in this tyrannical setting, it hits quite hard. So you want to make sure not only to have everybody soaking it together, but definitely to get some CDs out.
Yeah, at this point, you also have to look at how worth it's going to be and how dangerous it's going to be for the entire group to be able to actually take it. You were seeing Fang, for example, just immuning it at the start. You are going to see him running all the way out again to be able to take care of it himself here. So it'll be very interesting to see as you're seeing the Netherwalk going out, he's able to immune it. Reigns does actually have his Purgatory proc. He's just trying to drop his stacks here very quickly. When you're able to mix through things like Cheat Death or any of the extra any of the extra immunities like Netherwalk here, it's amazing to be able to work off of. But if you also have the battle res left available to you, in many cases it's actually a lot safer to be able to just battle res somebody than have everybody stack up and soak.
And we had kind of a wipe there with a failure detection pylon coming out of Team Omega Snipe, just making sure everybody is available and not having to run back. But that's extra deaths on the board that they don't need right now, and they still have to deal with those enchantresses, whilst Wrath of Azshara has already hit and gone beyond the halfway point for Skyline D, doing well to kind of circle around the boss, as the more time you spend in one area, the more tornadoes will spawn there, and of course those frost waves on the side. Eepel does go down, but they have 2 battle reses available to them, and Bloodlust coming up in 2 seconds. Bit of extra damage coming up for the team in just a moment as we see that Bloodlust icon light up immediately, and they're going to try and take this home.
Yeah, at this point, that they just want to make sure that instead of having everybody soaked, they just use a sacrifice, and they just got their res out onto them. And like I said, yeah, Bloodlust available, 5% left onto Wrath of Azshara here, as a Mega Snipe's just trying to do whatever they can to keep getting back into this game here, because at this point, any of the extra AoE damage going out is going to have to be immune or just have to be sacrificed here at this point. So they have almost a full Bloodlust duration before they actually had Fang going down there. They're getting the res off almost immediately here. There's a couple seconds left onto Bloodlust, and they're just burning the rest of the boss.
It was a purposeful death there, of course, with the debuff, wanting to make sure that it just doesn't threaten the team very much. Wrath of Azshara down to 3, and in a moment 2%, which is what goes below 3, Jack, if you didn't know.
Really?
But we'll be finishing this boss up in just a moment, in what honestly has been just another, I would say, back to typically dominant performance, at least a very clean performance that we've seen from Skyline D in their regional. So we have seen that they're human, but certainly only for a moment here as they wrap it up, and Wrath of Azshara will be going down, and Skyline D will be taking this 2-1.
Yeah, Wrath going down there. Skyline D making good on kind of that excellent regional performance. And, we were questioning, China is oftentimes just a difficult region in esports to really kind of get to know, what are they doing on a regular basis. It's much less communication to the Western world, so we don't get a chance to monitor them as closely as some of the other teams. But I got to say, Skyline D looked like they kind of patched up what most teams felt like would be their shortcoming. Were they going to be able to turn that creativity into raw speed? And, Sours, as we saw there, that is certainly something they were able to do in this first series against Team Omega Snipe.
There was a couple really promising pulls coming out of Team Omega Snipe, especially that going to the right path. Some might say they went the wrong way, but they unfortunately wiped at the end of it. Maybe something went a little bit south. The failure detection didn't quite go off just right. I think if Omega Snipe had been able to pull that off, that route looked like it had very much the potential to be quite faster than the Skyline D route was. The Skyline D, like we saw in China, like the teams were talking about, they were very clean and very fast, but not as they weren't like blowing the whole dungeon up. They're just executing their own clean strategy. Then Team Omega Snipe takes these high-risk plays, and unfortunately they don't quite get that big reward out of it this time. But this will be, of course, the first map again that they will be playing tomorrow. They do have Team Omega Snipe does have a full day break now to gather their thoughts and to rest up before the next stage of games. So they should be able to take this again tomorrow. Their time looked really good if they had just cleaned up a little bit, and we know they have that incredible Cathedral up their sleeves. So these guys are still in it in my heart, and I think they can definitely climb out of this.
Yeah, well said. And I want to harp a little bit on that word you brought up, execution, because I think that was really where Team Omega Sniped can improve, right? Go home. Nobody's actually out of the tournament today, so everyone has the opportunity, as you said, go home, kind of reset, look at what we did wrong, maybe some stage jitters again. For pretty much everybody, this is their first time on that LAN stage. So, what do we think? This is Jack. Team Omega Sniped is going into familiar territory now. They lost the series. What do you want to see them specifically kind of tune up for tomorrow?
Well, like you said, they're really no strangers to this situation. They have the exact same situation where they dropped in the lower bracket. They had the rest of the day to say, like, hey, what's going on? What can we fix? And when we got a chance to talk to them, they said a lot of it was just kind of nerves going into it, where, there's a lot of little errors in execution, a lot of little problems that they ended up having was just a little bit of nerves going to them. So, like I said, they have the rest of the day. They have, a ton of practice time ahead of them to be able to kind of fix that. And even if it's something as simple as, the failure detection pylon didn't work, or we're leaning too much on this, or we didn't have, for example, Fired Up and Luffy dying at different locations with different pylons to make sure that we're going to have one of them work all the time, right? Those are the little things that, even if this wasn't their pick, they can easily win that, if they're executing properly.
Ted, going into this, do you want to see them maybe do more of the actual practicing of running the dungeon, or would you rather see them kind of pull up the VODs, look at their individual mistakes, and kind of talk it through, if they have a limited amount of time?
For Team Omega Sniped, I mean, I think their performance is great. I mean, we talked about it. Overall, it's just, the thing is, we're at a level of play right now, and we have been, honestly, in part of the regionals too, but we're at a level of play right now where one mistake's going to cost you the game against a team that executed so well as Skyline D did. Skyline D's, they have a bit of slow and steady wins the race demeanor, if you will. I mean, their times are great, but as Sour said, of course, not blowing it out of the water. What I would like to see from them is they clearly practiced the strat for a reason. They didn't just say, hey, YOLO, we're going to do it today for the first time. It just slipped away from them, and I totally agree that if they just clean up maybe some of the nerves, maybe some of the sloppy play, whatever it may be. I mean, if any team can climb out of this losers bracket, it's going to be them.
Yeah, so they certainly do have that going for them based on historical precedent. I do worry a little bit, again, because we did talk so much to this team. They do seem like kind of a team that maybe this gets in their head. So I'm certainly hoping they go back, maybe have some food, have a good night of rest, and maybe don't let this get too much under their skulls there. Let's go and take a look, though, at the schedule. Again, this was the first series of the day. We have so much more MDI action coming up. We're going to be moving on to Shell's Angels taking on Gulch Trotters, and I'm super excited about this one. Shell's Angels was certainly, I would say, of all the teams we saw, the team that I frankly knew the least about, but surprised me the most in terms of how they performed.
I would agree in a nutshell there. I had to do it. But they
is that because we don't have hair? All right, you got me.
I totally agree with you. It's one of the coolest things so far about this weekend for me, and I'm sure you guys can agree, is being able to talk to these teams, putting faces to names and just seeing what their team demeanor is like. And definitely one of the question marks for me, I know some of the guys from the other teams. Of course, the China team is definitely a question mark for a lot of people. We just don't have the opportunity to really communicate with them. But Shell's Angels was, I would say, the ones that were maybe most in the dark for me for the remaining 6 teams that are here at the LAN. So I do agree with you. And they just had a great demeanor going into this, and they're very confident.
They have kind of a wide band in terms of how they perform, but the team unit is very much there. The guys are very much, they're all in. They actually met each other for the most part, actually through LFG for pushing keys. Gulch Trotters is another very interesting team to me, and they're a very upbeat, spirited team. They're clearly very excited about this opportunity. What are we kind of expecting them? First, Jack, what are you expecting from Gulch Trotters in this matchup?
Well, I think Gulch Trotters really has shown that they're one of the hungriest teams that we've really been seeing. They've been talking so much about their practice, and even when we had the delay for APAC, where we were having them rolled into some of the NA weekend, they were talking about how much they wanted to improve on themselves, where they were going wrong at. So that's what I'm really excited to see, is where that they're going to be, showing off their practice, but also showing off how well Oceanic can be going up against the world stage.
Sour, seeing that dab there, does that automatically make you not want the team to win? What are your thoughts on dabs in competitive play?
A little dab never hurt anybody, right? But these guys, they're really thirsty for it. And something also that's exciting about this team, make sure to vote in chat, hashtag KJA for Shell's Angels or hashtag GT for Gulch Trotters. But Gulch Trotters is the only team experienced with not being able to see the progress of the other team in these dungeons as they play it. So something that teams are able to do during the regional LANs is perhaps have one player either on the team or a friend in communication with them, communicating how far in the lead or behind you were to the other team. But here at the LAN setting, that is not going to be allotted for the players. They are playing in the dark, and Gulch Trotters is the only team that has the experience playing in the dark, climbing out of the lower bracket of the APAC region in order to get here.
Yeah, certainly. We talked about with all the players that in this particular tournament, maybe not so much in other esports, the layer of strategy for counterplay essentially ends at the door, right? Once you pick the map, prior to this, once you pick the affix, that was the amount of strategy in which you could kind of meddle with your opponent's plan, because once you obviously get into the map, it's just about executing super well. So curious to see how much of an advantage that will prove to be for Gold Striders, but certainly Shell's Angels have shown a great ability to be adaptive in how they play.
I mean, they certainly have, and you know, I talked to Shell's Angels, especially about their performance. You know, one of the heated matches with Method EU in the regionals, their Volt of the Wardens. I mean, you know, they're telling me by the end of it, they just kind of had, you know, once they got the top two, they were just tired. They were happy to compete with it, but I mean, they know they can fire it up, and they know they have some of the biggest strategies coming in, or at least they feel that way.
Well, 2 X factors really coming up in our next match, but first series of the day is done. Skyline D takes this first series 2-1 against Team Omega Snipe. Don't go anywhere though, guys. More Mythic Dungeon Invitational action coming from the first ever Global LAN.
Greetings, my friends. So nice to see you around the hearth once more.
You know, even Paladin is definitely one of the strongest contenders, if not the strongest at this point. The actual class diversity still remains high.
Bunny Hopper has conceded. AH is going to the Summer Championships.
This time we're going to be seeing different takes on the same types of decks and different lineup strategies.
Oh!
It's go time. This is the Hearthstone Summer Championship.
We came in, we were right on the edge of not even qualifying for the regionals.
We were pretty scared of being dropped down.
Every 5 seconds, checking the times.
We had a legit shot at it, but we knew we weren't favorites either. We went through seed 1, 2, 3, and 4. We ended up being one of the teams who had the most deaths throughout the run, but we just pulled bigger than most other teams.
We had this great tactic, which I don't think many other teams use, where Doru will go to sleep, and he just dreamed up strats. You know, he'd come in the morning and he'd go, guys, I have this great idea for Court of Stars. We're going to pull everything into the first boss. And we go, you know, that's crazy. That sounds like a nightmare. And he'd go, no, try it. And then we end up doing it. And everyone just sort of brings their bit in, and it all just comes together.
We have a good team in the form of personalities, I think. Like, we kind of click.
Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational Global LAN Final. My name is Robert Wing, and we've swapped the desk a little bit, got a little bit more Europe representation here as we brought in good friends Caroline, Jack, and Trekkie. How are you all doing? Do you guys enjoy watching that first match in the back there?
It was pretty close, so I enjoyed watching it a lot. There were some mistakes on both sides, but it was close, and I'm actually glad that Skyline D won.
Yeah, I like the Cathedral from Omega Sniped as well. They were really rehearsed, and I was really a strong pick for them and showed how well they practiced now.
You know, Jack, obviously we've talked at length about that first series, so I'll just ask, how does it feel to be wrong?
Well, as long as Twitch chat was wrong too, I'm happy.
As long as we're all wrong together. Certainly a win for China, an opportunity for North America to do better in the future. But let's go ahead and talk about this series. Shell's Angels, as we said kind of before the break, they were, you know, we didn't know a whole lot about them really, but talking to them, they are just a group of wholesome boys. I legitimately love these young men. They've met through LFG. They've become friends. They bonded. They're constantly trying different strategies. They're certainly a team to watch, I think, in this global LAN, Trekkie.
Yeah, they did very well in the regionals as well. They were then in the very semifinals. They were cut out by Method PogChamp and then clawed their way back from the lower bracket and then ended up winning the finals. And it just shows they really have some very well-rehearsed maps that they do extraordinary on.
Yeah, and for Goldstriders, again, we talked about this was a team who, Free Marcy seemed kind of a little bit ahead of everyone else in terms of having that #1 spot locked up, but Goldstriders was really fighting hard for that #2 spot, it felt like, against Free Pumps, and Goldstriders, obviously the team that emerged, getting a little bit of help from Free Pumps, actually, that's Free Marcy, rather, but did clearly take that #2 spot. Where do we think this goes into the narrative of Europe kind of being one of the favorite regions versus Asia-Pacific, Nagura?
To be fair, at this point, I think all the regions are going to be really close to each other, as it is the two winning teams. So I don't think Europe is going to be that favorite. But we will see later on. We'll see in this match for sure. Shell's Angels, of course, the #1 seed from Europe. And as you said earlier, no one really knew that Shell's Angels is going to do that well because there were so many stacked teams in Europe. So it was surprising that they won. And yeah, they had some really good strats. They did those huge pulls that we didn't see from other teams. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins, especially against Goldstriders.
You passed the test the last desk build. I set you up to be like, oh, Europe is the best region. And you were like, no, we'll be humble. Jack, take notes here. But between these two teams where they have kind of a wide array of styles and strategies, what are you expecting to see from these teams when they kind of clash head-to-head?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, the Goldstriders is kind of out there to prove themselves and to show that, you know, while Oceanic doesn't have nearly the breadth of Europe, they're not as deep of a roster as Europe, you know, their top teams can actually hang with the rest of them for it. I think in a lot of ways, you know, they might actually be having some very similar compositional picks the compositional picks, but not only compositional, but also the counter picks, you know. So I think a lot of these games will be a lot closer than maybe we saw with the Skyline D versus Omega Sniped here. So I'm actually really pumped up about this matchup.
Yeah, we talked a lot about Skyline D being pretty creative in terms of the rosters they brought. You know, Asia Pacific is also a region. You know, my background is obviously more oriented towards Hearthstone, so Asia Pacific always kind of having the potential to just kind of bring out wackier, sillier things that are more comfort picks, things that they feel they do well on. Trekkie, are you expecting that from them here today? Are you expecting Goldstriders to play a little bit more standard MDI Warcraft?
I think Goldstriders is probably going to go very much standard, what they're comfortable with. They had to lost regionals, they had to claw their way off, losing the first battle, and then all the way in lower bracket the whole time. And I think they just really going to pull to their strength and do what they're comfortable with. The dungeons are higher. They've been able to practice these dungeons with very set affixes, which means that they probably have every pull down to a T.
Yeah, we see here we are going to be starting, as with the first 4 matches of the day, Darkheart Thicket, and I just want to say, I'm so glad I get a break from Sloot in Darkheart Thicket.
It's
I'm
only
not
the first day.
I'm not sure I could have done 4 straight matches of the tree, cat, and bear pun. So
Just wait for Rich.
Nagura, you're going to have to be a good example for Jack here and lead him down the path of maybe slightly less puns.
I hope so.
We'll see. We'll see.
We'll seed. That's where you were supposed to go there. All right, but we are going to be starting out there. And as we said, teams have had more than ample opportunity to practice for this map in specific, this affix combination. This is something most of the teams felt fairly comfortable. Again, 7-0 map. There's really not a whole lot of surprises and tricks to it. We saw both of the first 2 teams certainly had it on lock. There were some execution issues, but Nagura, are you expecting either of these teams to have issues with this map, or do you think based on your talks with them that they're going to perform well?
I think all of the teams were worried about this map, especially because of Sanguine and Bolstering. So there's some trash packs that, they tend to just stand still and cast a long time, so it's difficult to get them out of the Sanguine, but I think they are pretty confident about it.
It's also difficult to tell these teams apart based on the compositions. We're just seeing the same things across the board. One thing I do find interesting, Boomkins. We really hadn't seen too much of them until Shell's Angels, and now we're actually going to see Cultstrader put Chompy on that Boomkin as well. So double Boomkin composition. Jack, any insight as to why they might be pivoting towards this?
Well, I think, like Nagura was talking about, I'm sure Nagura is very excited to see the double Boomkin going into this. It's, the comfort picks and going into what they think is also going to be best. But it's also part of the slight changes that we've seen going from regionals to LAN, where the artifact weapon has actually been increased by 15 eye levels in accordance with the Netherlight Crucible there. So casters in general are just to be a little bit stronger, and you're leaning a little bit less so on the heavy monk compositions.
Yeah, we do obviously see those monks, but we're not seeing what we saw in the regional weekends, which were sometimes
double
7 monks in a 5-man group. So we're not leaning as heavily. Trekkie, we talked about the fact that we expected some more of the standard compositions coming out from Gulchtrotters. It looks like they are sticking to that. Taking a look at the results here, no surprise. Europe usually shows up in force. To vote for Europe. I wouldn't sleep on Gulchtrotters. I'm pretty high on them after talking to them. I think they have good heads on their shoulders and good gamesmanship, really. They weren't the type that seemed like they were going to tilt, say they take that first map loss. But, chat, you've said Shell's Angels, so we'll have to see if you and the analyst can be right this time around.
I think a lot of the Australians are sleeping as well this time, so let's just say it's that.
The rigged vote.
Yeah.
All right, well, as we get ready to hop into this match, real quick, guys, down the row here, who's taking it? Nagura.
I'm for Shell's Angels.
All right, Jack.
I have faith in my boy Sierra Lou. Shell's Angels.
Yeah, Shell's Angels.
You just met him. How is he already your boy? Does Ted know this?
Oh, don't tell Ted.
Yeah, that's the name of the game here. But we're going to be hopping into this match in just a moment. And again, Darkheart Thicket is the name of the game. It's trees, bears, it's all kinds of gross.
That's oh my.
Combative, weird stuff. So take it away.
Nagura, happy to have you along, and a slight break from the punmanship here as we're diving into the thick.
Oh no.
Starting it off, we're seeing both teams, like I said, running that mirror composition here. You actually are seeing the invisibility potions going out for Shell's Angels, while Gulchtrotters is opting to use the Shroud of Concealment here. So very interesting to see if you're going to see Shell's Angels just taking another quick Shroud of Concealment, maybe going to be around the Bears leading up to the first boss here. What do you make of that?
Yeah, interesting to see. I think both teams earlier did use that Shroud from the Rogue. Of course, Rogue very good in this dungeon just because of this mass stealth, getting past some of those trash mobs, especially those cats. They're very, very dangerous. Oh, we see one death coming in from Shell's Angels already. They use the Battle Rest, get Azshara up immediately. We can see they all dying really pretty much at the same time for Shell's Angels here. So not a lot of bolstering going on, and definitely no healing from Sanguine. So good job by Shell's Angels here.
Yeah, very strong control. It was really kind of scary seeing Azshara going down there. I guess he just ended up, and you are seeing the Shroud of Concealment as they're trying to go around here, because yeah, it was interesting. They ended up using their invisibility potions immediately at the start here, and then they're again taking advantage of the Shroud of Concealment. That way they're going to get around all of the cats there that they don't really want to worry about, and even going right up onto the boss here. So excellent speed on the side of Shell's Angels to be able to get all the way around here, get in a great position to start the boss. You'll probably see them pull a couple of the flowers and maybe the Dryad that is standing right next to them, and then being able to quickly engage with the boss here. So excellent strategy coming out of Shell's Angels early on.
Yeah, we actually see the point of view here from Shape, the Rogue, who went past the boss in stealth and pulled that pack to the boss, of course, as we saw earlier in the map as well. Both of the teams using their Bloodlust. I think both of the teams also skipped the casters before this boss, which we didn't see before, so they're probably going to have to make up for that trash later on. But we see this boss fight here, of course. we see the leap from the boss coming in on the furthest away target, applying the Grievous debuff, also doing some damage. Then you need to heal them up above 90% HP, just as well like the affix, pretty much, and then it's gone.
Yeah, you're seeing actually Sierra making sure he had Hand of Sacrifice onto Shell there in the back. That way they're able to help mitigate the damage. And early on during Bloodlust, you want to make sure that the Boomkins not forced into bear form as often as possible there, just to get as much damage out as quickly as possible there. And making sure that you're not even having the threat of, dropping incredibly low that you're not able to quite catch back up there. So excellent moves there as we're getting to 18% down onto Glade Dallas there. Really good moves by the rest of the team. And at this entire point in time, Sierra never actually has to get out of melee, never really has to get out of there to help split the damage. And you're seeing the same side of Gulchtrotters as they're quickly catching up in terms of boss damage.
Yeah, definitely. And we see, of course, insane amount of damage coming in from the whole team. Of course, the Paladin being able to do the damage because they don't have to take the charge, as they both have a Moonkin just taking the charge. And we also see Gulchtrotters did have one death earlier, I believe from the skip. Tech died the monk, but they didn't use their battle rest, so they have the battle rest advantage here.
Yeah, and as Shell's Angels and Gulchtrotters both kind of moving on, exact same in terms of trash percentage and boss deaths, and personal deaths going on, and boss deaths, I guess you could say. At this point, like you said, they kind of have a lot of trash that they need to make up as they're going forward here. So it'll be very interesting to see, what all that they need to be able to get. And a lot of times you will be looking at maybe taking in some of those keeper packs, or maybe trying to get them away from the rest of the group. That way they're not going to be able to heal all the flowers if they need them.
Yeah, I think Shell's Angels did actually a pretty interesting pull here. They pulled a couple of flowers, entered right as well. Of course, there's some spots in Darkheart Thicket. If the tank walks there, then the flowers will just kind of teleport to you, as we saw them doing right here. Gulchtrotter is doing a pretty similar port, but we see that the health actually not as equal as for Shell's Angels here, so bolstering might be a problem for them.
Yeah, and we've seen, just in the last series where they were having some mobs that were just not properly taken down at once, and it just led to a full team wipe when they can gain so much HP so quickly here. So it will be something to watch out for Gulchtrotters as they're going into it here. Shell's Angels look like they're setting themselves up to get the rest of these flowers, trying to move through those, of course, the different keepers. That way they're not going to be able to heal the flowers. Getting onto that Dryad pack with the flowers as well, getting everything all in together will make it so much easier. And when you're able to take, the Repentance and the Sap to be able to move past a lot of those mobs, and then getting everything stacked together, because there's so many areas in Darkheart where you're able to just instantly have the mobs kind of teleport to you, get on top of you, get stacked. Makes it a lot easier for the tank to be able to get everything together.
Now we can see Gulchtrotters here having some trouble finishing up this trash pack because those flowers were bolstered so much. And of course, as I said earlier, Sanguine, usually not one of the most difficult affixes to deal with, but here in this dungeon, especially in combination with bolstering, those flowers, they just tend to have a really long cast, as this Root Burst, for example. And it's not interruptible with a normal interrupt. You can only interrupt it with knockbacks, for example. So having the two Moonkins here for the knockback is actually good for both of those teams.
Yeah, and really allows you to kind of catch up, if you're not having the grips, or you're not going to be, worrying about like Ring of Peace, for example. It really allows you to just push them just far enough to be able to get out of it. And at Shell's Angels side, we've seen such clean control to make sure that they're going to be able to stay out of them. And actually, very interesting, right as the different CCs are wearing off, maybe they were using just the paralysis in addition to like Sap or a blind. They're able to actually aggro all the keepers in together and then start pulling them into any of these little gooey mobs here. So while the area effect may actually be a little bit limited when they're going to have any of the mushrooms coming out here, they're still easily able to kind of kite back and not have to worry about it too much, as long as they're staying in very good control here. So this might actually be the most lethal pull for Sierra going into this.
And we actually see Tick dying here, the monk for Gulchtrotters died on a pull. I'm not sure, maybe they interrupted too late, as they have this fixate pretty much. It's a channeled cast. It does a ticking damage. If it goes through, you get feared. So as it is fortified, of course, and those mobs are bolstered too, so it's increasing damage. If you don't interrupt it immediately, someone might actually get one-shot or two-shotted by this cast. So it's very crucial that you interrupt all those casts. As we see Shell's Angels using that Typhoon to get them out of the Sanguine. And we also, as you said, see them use those keepers and pulling them together with the Dwellers, and they actually pretty much died at the same time, so good job by them as well.
Yeah, you actually have an extremely bolstered flower there on the side of Gulchtrotters there. They look like they might just end up, having a bunch of deaths to be able to reset and be able to get out of combat, drop the health of it. But you're seeing on the side of Shell's Angels here, as they are engaging with Oakheart, as Gulchtrotters is just trying to get themselves set up to deal with the rest of this. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to actually deal with this bolstered flower that much, because it is just so heavy and so much HP that is bolstered to it, especially when it's dipping into the Sanguine there. So this looks to be, kind of the same position as Omega Snipe, where they were really just having this kind of crucial mistake that's hurting, or sorry, as as Skyline D that really was just hurting them and setting them back so much further.
Yeah, I think they forced a wipe at this point on Gallstrader's side as they have 9 deaths coming in and the bolster was too much. But I'm not sure how they're waiting here for the skip because they still have those 2 keepers that Shell's Angels actually pulled with the next pack, but Gallstrader skipped them, so now they have to do the skip again, and it actually cost them quite a bit of time. Everyone releasing, everyone having to wait for that to come through to skip those keepers again. Well, Shell's Angels is already on O-card, and we actually I don't think they pulled the bats to the boss as we saw from the team before.
Yeah, it looks like they just have, just allowing the saplings to kind of stay up, because whenever you're dealing with this boss, of course, he will spawn any of those little entangling roots that will periodically just spawn a couple of ads that can just quickly stack up and just deal a lot of damage. But the advantage there is that, while you are able to take Hand of Freedom and just run over all of the different roots, you want to make sure you're actually able to buff up the rogue, have that increased single target damage, and Shell's Angels is just been a huge part of their play, being able to dump so much single target damage. We've been seeing bosses just melt so much faster than Gulchtrotters.
Yeah, definitely. We can see the Rogue, of course, doing this 3.7 million DPS here, which is mostly single target, so definitely a lot of damage coming in. We also see a really clean play so far by Shell's Angels. They have this 1 death, which was Sira, the Holy Paladin, at the very start, where they battle rest him immediately. But other than that, it has been very, very clean. We saw very little issues with bolstering and Sanguine. None of them ups healed very much. They all killed it very evenly. We even see them here pulling the Fury, which has a lot more HP than the Slimes, together, which, of course, the Rogue is very, very good for, as he has a lot of single target bursts, especially if there's more targets around with the Shuriken Storm. So good play by them to kill everything at the same time.
Yeah, and at that point, it is highlighting, the importance of being able to work around your other teammates there. Making sure that, for example, Shell and Hugurmo are not actually just nuking everything down at once the second that they are able to. Not only for the bolstering effect, but also to allow Ashine to help really just neutralize the Fury as rapidly as possible here. Gulchtrotters, like you mentioned, is pulling those extra bats into the boss here as they're getting O-card almost down, and they will be catching up a little bit in terms of trash percentage. But at this point, with an 8 death differential, they still got a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen the 9 deaths coming in, and also Shell's Angels already an 82%, 86% trash percentage, so they can skip a lot of trash after Dresseron, and Gallstrader still needs to catch up quite a bit with trash. They do kill O-card here, so they might be able to catch up if they have a special trick here coming in, but Shell's Angels looking very clean at this point.
I think Shell's Angels' big trick really was them pulling the keepers into that extra GUI pack before O-cart went out there. That it gave them so much time, so much opportunity to be able to get the extra trash percentage. That way they can skip more a little bit later on. But at this point they have, I guess, the bats and maybe one of the preliminary pulls right before Xavius, and then they're done, right? And going into this, they've done such an excellent job of pulling extra mobs into it. Rogues have really shined in this tournament in general to be able to pump the extra single target damage, and it's just been on full display here as they're going into Dresseron.
Yeah, definitely. Rogues, especially in this very first map pool where you have Darkheart as your starting map and you have Eye of Azshara as well, where Rogues just really shine, as you said. And we can see, of course, Shell's Angels pulling all those Whelplings, walking over those X. The Whelplings, of course, do not bolster the boss and they do not drop Sanguine, so the affixes are not a big deal on this boss. It's also fortified. So we can see, of course, the Moonkin seems to do a lot of damage. Most of it is just damage on the Whelp, so although the Rogue does do most of its damage on the boss.
Yeah, and you're seeing, how much more quickly they're able to actually get this boss down here. And even Zero actually going at the 2 million DPS. And a lot of that will be the, the cleave of, for example, Consecration or any of the DPS trinkets that he'll be running. But when you're able to have such strong single target damage, and in general for Sierra to not have to really worry about healing Divine that often, and just the rest of the team taking so little damage, doing a great job baiting the cave in towards the other side of the wall, then they're able to slowly kind of kite the boss over to where they need to be able to get Xavius taken down. So phenomenal control here by Shell's Angels throughout this entire dungeon, executing so well.
Yeah, very clean run so far. We see Gallstratters caught up a little bit on trash percentage, so they're only 1% behind. So I would assume they're doing a very similar strat here coming into this hallway. We probably see them skip most of the trash here, and we also saw Omega Sniped earlier pull the bats actually into Xavier's room. So we'll see with what strategy Shell's Angel is going here with.
Yeah, at this point, they're actually just pulling into the double caster pack in together here. They're going to be doing whatever they can to kind of nuke them all down. They actually didn't get the summoner quite in just yet, so maybe he's just waiting on the grip to be able to grab it in time. But you do have to worry about any of those curses that the summoners will be casting out. While it is a curse that, of course, the Paladin cannot directly dispel, you are able to use Hand of Freedom to be able to remove it because it is not only the haste slow, but it also is the movement speed decrease here. So being able to actually see the Hand of Freedom going out there, making sure they're removing that, but also just able to quickly neutralize these mobs. And again, we've been seeing a phenomenal job keeping everything low together here.
Yeah, the summoner, it probably was a mistake to not be able to grip it in, so I was a little bit worried that it's gonna get bolstered, but as soon as the summoner got in, we saw a rogue switch to it immediately, and a monk, and burst it down. We can see them use their shroud here, going past those bats. They're probably gonna skip the last pack as well, and then they're at the last boss, so they do miss 5% trash percentage, which is probably gonna be those bats that the healer, I would assume, is gonna pull towards the boss later.
Yeah, we see, I believe it's the Shine and is the only one who's going to kind of off on his own. So he would be kind of the one to watch for, as you're going to have the Tricks of the Trade going out onto Divine. Divine is then standing into the wall here. He's able to actually have all the mobs just teleport right on top of him here. And then you're going to be able to actually bring those bats into the boss here. A Shine is going to be able to catch back up with the group and then be able to actually engage the boss so well. So really taking advantage of a lot of the different, conveniences that Darkheart Thicket really can offer you by being able to get all those mobs in together and getting kind of an interesting quirk going on.
Yeah, we see Gastraders actually doing the exact same thing. They also miss 5%, and there are the bats. There's a Bloodlust being popped for both groups. Of course, Xavius is kind of a difficult boss. It's not tyrannical, so it's a little bit easier for them to survive those abilities like the Nightmare Bolt and that feed on the weak that is coming in from this boss. We see CRE as well having the debuff, the fear debuff, that if someone steps into the zone underground, then he will get feared. Of course, they know exactly what to do here, and they're not going to do that.
Yeah, and at this point, they're just making sure they're hitting that 50% transition mark, quickly jumping into bear form and being able to swap back out. You're having the Devotion Aura going out for the Paladin there. Make sure they're keeping everybody in as safe a position as possible there, as they're doing a great job keeping these Bloodseekers alive, keeping the bats alive, making sure they're able to funnel as much single target damage into the boss as they possibly can here. And really, when you have the mirror comps, they're having the mirror strategies. You're seeing the same thing on the side of Gulch Trotters here. But when you're having 8 death differential here, Shell's Angels just pouring, roaring ahead.
Yeah, to be fair, without those deaths, it actually would have been really close. But Shell's Angels is so much cleaner, just having this one death, and just a very, very good run by Shell's Angels here.
Yep, 10% left onto Shade of Xavius here, and they will be able to get all the extra trash percentage as both the boss and the Bloodseekers are dying so closely together here, doing an excellent job making sure they kind of have that balance and they don't have to worry about it. You are seeing Shell going down there. They are quickly being able to get that battle res up and ready to go here. It does look like they're just able to quickly neutralize this. The boss is down. They got that 100% trash back, and just an excellent run on the side of Shell's Angels.
Shell's Angels came in here again with the overall favorite, the winner in the Europe Regional, and really showing that strength in this first outing. I mean, that was just an exceedingly clean run, and it's impressive because this was a team that when we first saw them in the regionals, as I mentioned earlier, kind of had a wide band in performance. They had those matches where they looked really clean. They had other matches less so. The composition didn't necessarily always line up to what was optimal to the map, but looking incredibly impressive here. Unfortunately for Gulch Trotters, they had that one big mistake that really set them back, and when you get to this level of play, that's going to be really what separates these teams. Who makes those mistakes, who doesn't, who executes cleanly.
And even if Gulch Trotters didn't have that larger mistake, I agree that it would have been close, but it really showed, I think with the Keeper pack especially, and how much more rapidly they were able to execute, being able to get all the bats onto the boss for Xavius at the very end, how much better the execution was and how much more quickly they were kind of able to get ahead of the rest of the group. It did seem extremely weird having an invisibility potion used at the very beginning of the instance, but it really showed that it was such a strong strategy going forward.
Shell's Angels taking early advantage, but Gulch Trotters will have an opportunity to snake it out in map number 2, as it will be their pick. Will they be able to? Will Shell's Angel advance to the winner's bracket, or upper bracket rather? Don't go anywhere, we'll find out after this break.
who's going to be the biggest tilter on your team?
Shape, for sure.
Yeah, when Shape gets tilted, he loses all sense of what's going on in the dungeon. It's just kind of like he tilts and then it just gets worse. It's like a roll-on effect.
Then he'll just use his Hearthstone.
Yeah, he uses Hearthstone. He's just like, see ya.
Back in 2 hours, I guess.
Mutes Discord completely. Yeah, it's over. And that's Shape. But
I would say at the same time though, like we've come back from so many like defeats in the first round and then won the next 2 rounds. So we don't let tilt affect us to the point where it completely destroys our gameplay at all.
Correct. While there are some kids on the team, overall the maturity level hasn't been too bad. I'm just really proud that we've made it here and we're able to compete. It's been really good.
Goldstrutter's down early in the series. Hopefully Shape and his dabbing picture there aren't tilting too much. Obviously going to need to kind of muster that willpower to get back into this series. But as I was saying, Techniques and really this whole group, they've shown thus far that they're a fairly versatile group. Some of the other teams we're seeing, they have very practiced regiments. They adhere very much to the rule book. And Goldstrutters just seem like a group of guys that are honestly just having fun doing this.
And they've really shown, they were kind of joking around with each other, like, oh yeah, we have some kids on the team, but everyone's, pretty mature and pretty good about it. And, by seeing the interview, it just shows it's just all about having fun with this group as we're going into it.
All right, taking a look now, we are going to be heading over to Court of Stars at the behest of Goldstrutters. And Court of Stars, we kind of talked about over the regional weekends. It's a map that really pathing and the way you actually approach it matters so monumentally. And we saw teams who had good mechanics, good understanding of what they needed to do, but they didn't have a good path, really kind of suffer on this map. So this is definitely a Goldstrutter specialty.
Yeah, I think Court of Stars is a very risky map to choose as a counter pick, especially because there's quite a bit of RNG involved in this dungeon. While in most other dungeons, they actually removed most of the RNG, like for example in Arcway, the middle way is always open on this tournament. But for Court of Stars, the Enforcer spawn is still random. Of course, all the buffs are disabled except the Vial on the first boss, but it still can be devastating for the Enforcer spawn just not be in your favor. And you can't have this one strategy that always works because it's that RNG involved.
Yeah, Trekkie, I was going to say, we saw kind of the evolution of this map in real time when we were watching. I believe it was the Europe Regional. What do you actually think of this as a counter pick? Is this a place you would go with the map pool?
I think it's a very interesting map pick. Just as Nagura said, it's still one of those dungeons that have a little bit too much RNG for several teams to be comfortable in. And the Enforcer spawns, and if you are lucky, you can get an Enforcer spawn that's far away, so on the very third one, so you can then pull the boss and kite it out and skip having to kill one altogether. But if that one spawns right where you are, you don't really benefit that much from it. But
yeah, and based on what we saw out of Shell's Angels, I don't believe this was one of their better performing maps. They certainly had at least Vault of the Wardens really sticks out of my memory as kind of being one of their definitive maps. So, for Goldstrutters, this is probably as good as a counterpick strategy as you're going to get. Again, Goldstrutters needs to win to keep on in the upper bracket. If they lose here, they will be going down to the lower bracket alongside Team Omega Sniped. Take it away.
And Nagura, one of the things I'm most excited about going into these going from the regionals to the global stage is, not only being able to see the different strats coming together, but how much more closely teams have really been. Where, we saw with the European region, which was especially savage, right? Seeing what the best and the top of the teams can be running in with this dungeon, I'm very excited to see, especially because, like you said, nothing is really going to be quite set in stone with how they're going to be doing it.
Definitely, and we also saw the first map being really close between those two. Of course, there was this one mistake Goldstrutters do, but mistakes can happen, right? So if the same thing happens as those teams are going to be really close again, if Shell's Angels is the one team that does make the mistakes, maybe it's just going to go the other way around. But Court of Stars, as I said, interesting map choice, especially because maybe this is this trick of them thinking, oh, no one is going to choose Court of Stars as a counter map because you can't really have a set strategy. So maybe that's the reason why they picked it, and just thinking that the other team just didn't practice it at all.
That's a potential opportunity, but it was also interesting if you, in the highlight we had for Shell's Angels, they were even talking about, dreaming up new strategies of like, oh, let's just pull everything into Court of Stars. So I'm really excited about this, and a lot of times, like you said, when you're counting on everybody to kind of have the similar level, maybe that is an extra show of confidence for Goldstrutters, where they say, no, we really think that we're the better team. We don't have to pick something that, has this super defined route, has this and that, right? We're just going to win because we are going to be that stronger team. And a lot of times when you're running this mirror matchup, it's really going to be interesting to see, which healer's going to be pumping out more damage, how are the tanks going to be mitigating this any of the big fights here.
So we see both of the teams actually doing some really crazy pulls here. They both used that trap to go past the very first pull. Then we saw the Moonkins disabling the beacons at the start, and we see Gaussstriders actually already on the boss. We see the Holy Paladin disabling those beacons, while the rest of his team is killing that big trash pull over there. Both of the teams do have their Bloodlust still, but we saw Gaussstriders losing one player and having to use that Battle Rest already.
Yeah, you're seeing actually Sierra just running ahead, making sure he's able to get all the beacons disabled going into their rev for the boss, same as Dags is doing right there. But it's also interesting we're seeing Gulchstriders mopping up the last of, the kind of the traditional mobs that you're going to be seeing there, getting everything in all together here, and both sides doing an excellent job making sure they're rapidly wiping out the trash. But Gulchstriders does have a little bit of advantage in terms of trash percentage going into this.
Yeah, we also see both of them pulling the boss now, both of them using that Bloodlust. Of course, we have the affixes Tyrannical, Necrotic, and teaming here in this dungeon, so the bosses are going to be quite difficult to deal with. But this first boss, usually not the most difficult boss in Court of Stars, as there is no unavoidable abilities. Of course, there's this debuff where you have to jump 3 times, but most classes can get out of it. Of course, both of them also have a Holy Paladin, and they have this freedom to get rid of the debuff. And we have the Moonkin, the Druid, who can just shapeshift out of it, and the Monk can get out of it too. So this shouldn't be a big problem for either of those teams.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to see, when you're able to just dispel one person, freedom another, and make sure that, as you're seeing on the side of Dags, he's the one who actually ends up jumping to make it a little bit easier for the rest of the team here. And he's doing a good job of just actually jumping out of melee to make sure that he's not going to be in range of any of the laser beams that are going out. You just saw on the side of Gulchstriders, or any of that kind of like hourglass shape AoE that Gerdo will actually end up putting out here. But very important to note, I think, is just the Patrol Captain health that's going out here. Like, they both pulled the boss at about the same time here, but Gulchstrider's really pulling ahead in terms of the boss damage that they're able to do here. So, whereas Shell's Angels looks like they're pulling just a little bit of extra trash for when the boss does end up dying, it's very, very clear the disparity in damage as Gulchstrider's is just about to down Gerdo.
Yeah, we saw both of the teams pulling some of the trash to the boss. Of course, none of those affixes prevent them from doing that, except, of course, Necrotic. The tank might have some difficulties dealing with all that Necrotic stacks, especially if there's a lot of mobs at once that he needs to tank. And both of those teams do not have a Warlock. Usually, when you do those big pulls on Necrotic dungeons, then you just have the Warlock go with the slow ring, so the tank, if he gets a lot of Necrotic stacks, he can just start cutting them up. As long as he doesn't get melee hits from them up, then the Necrotic just disappears. But we saw both of the tanks dealing really well with the trash and the boss at the same time. And yeah, we see Gaussstriders, of course, all the way on the way to the next trash already here.
Yeah, but you're seeing Dags, of course, just dropping the quick hammer of justice onto the course of the construct there, able to skip around it, and then he is just going to run through and usually probably just end up dying here to be able to open the gates basically for the rest of the Gulchstrider side here. You could take advantage, you could basically, stealth up or use an Invis pod or anything like that, but that's usually going to take too much time or take too much damage kind of away from you and the rest of the group. So a lot of times it's easier, it's quicker to be able to just die, get the gates open for the rest of the group, and then quickly rejoin your team as they're going to be engaging with not only the Mistress pack, but it looks like they're going to be pulling the double Inquisitors as well.
Oh yeah, that's a big pull coming in from Gaussstriders here. We saw them as soon as the door opens, they were just standing there for a second, just looking what's going on. Also, they pulled the Enforcer on top of this trash pack as well, because as I said earlier, this is quite a bit of RNG involved here in this dungeon.
Yeah, and they're actually just having the Enforcer out basically in the open field as you're seeing Dag, who actually instantly pops his bubble, make sure that he's able to drop sacrifice onto one of the other teammates here, probably using Aura Mastery as well. There's so much dot damage going on to him. It's so much pressure for him to be able to make sure everyone is getting clear to the dot, getting as much healing out as possible into that area here. And phenomenal moves there, because now they're able to drag it around the corner. Now they're able to prevent a lot of that dot damage. They don't have to worry about it as much here. But that was a lot of pressure onto the healer to make sure that they're able to stay alive in what is a very dangerous trash pack.
Yeah, we saw Tick going down the Monk for Gaussstriders, but of course you can just release, as there was no mini-boss in combat, so you can release straight away, and the release point is really close, so he was able to just get back really quick. Now we see them pull this mini-boss, the first one. They're probably just going to drag it over to the other side, as they probably have the Enforcer spawn on the next side, and they're probably just going to pull some trash on top of this mini-boss as well.
Yeah, and having to deal with Amakutya, of course, as they're just kind of making their way around the room. And it does give them a good opportunity when they drag it into the back to be able to see where the Enforcer spawns without it end up spawning right on top of you there. So really good move to be able to kind of sit back, wait, see where it goes, because so many times when we've seen Court of Stars especially, it's so easy to be able to kind of wipe the entire group just from a little face pull, just from being in the wrong area at the wrong time, not accounting for some of the risks that can come up into this dungeon here. But they're also doing an excellent job positioning themselves to be able to deal with the impact, which they're going to just swirl right into with the second Inquisitor set.
Okay, so we see the Inquisitor and Enforcer being pulled on top of this first minibus here, and as you said, again, it's just in the open, so they're probably just going to take the first Fel detonation, as we can see here. The whole group getting the Fel detonation. Throwing means everyone is using their defensives, and of course, Dag, the Holy Paladin, is using his wings, as we can see here, healing up that debuff, and now they pulled it around the corner so they can line of sight the next one.
It was actually extremely scary. Actually, Dag got hit by the Searing Glare at the exact same time that having all the stacks going out from the Enforcer there. So no surprise to kind of see Skylark going down just because of how big the necrotic stacks were going. But right here, he doesn't have wings, he doesn't have Avenger, he probably doesn't have Devotion Aura either. So they're basically just going to have Chompy just tank it here to be able to finish it off here and try to get everybody to survive from that last tick of the Enforcer as just everybody goes down there. But a really strong recovery overall, like where it could have been so much worse for them, that they did a great job to be able to have Chompy just instantly get into bear form, tank the last of it. They're quickly getting everybody back up as they have to deal with the eyeball mini boss that's going out here. They are just quickly getting out of his way, getting everybody a bite to eat, getting their food buffs back, and just reforming the group here. So it's really a scary situation, but they recovered from it excellently.
Yeah, we saw the strength of Moonkin here going into bear form, even having the Fel detonation debuff on him while tanking this Enforcer. And thank God Dag and the Rogue just died when the Enforcer was dead. So as you said, they didn't lose too much here. Of course, the deaths is 5 seconds on the timer, so it does cost them. But they didn't have to pull the trash again as they killed everything that they had pulled. So they're not going to lose too much here as they are on the second mini boss here, pulling another Inquisitor on top of it. Those Inquisitors are actually very dangerous as they have this one ability that you need to interrupt. If you do not interrupt it properly or use a wrong ability to interrupt it, then we will see those eyes spawning that fixate on random players as we see them coming out now. And they actually do quite a lot of damage. On top of this mini boss, it's also pretty dangerous.
And they do a great job making sure they're getting the Searing Glares kicked, and they're also just trying to kite out as Skylark is just doing whatever he can to start dropping his necrotic stacks here, which looks like a big threat. Chompy again getting fixated by the Disintegration Beam by the boss here, doing a great job jumping into bear form, knowing that they have to actually worry and deal with the rest of that damage, as they are also worrying about the Inquisitors. It can be very easy for Dag, for example, just to heal through the Inquisitor beam, but if you're also having to worry about, like you said, wrongfully interrupting the Inquisitor, getting zapped by the Ice Storm there, it's such an easy way for everything to kind of spiral out of control here.
Yeah, we see Shell's Angels actually also downed its second mini-boss, so they both just have the last mini-boss left. We will see if they do this pull that we saw for the first time in the European regionals, where you pull the boss with the last mini-boss together. If you pull him as far away as you can, then the boss itself will actually reset, but the mini-boss will not reset. So you're able to pretty much skip this last Enforcer that you don't have to kill, because Enforcers are quite difficult to deal with, and you can pull this mini-boss with this harbor pull that we see here, and then you just get the last percentage.
Yeah, they do an excellent job in terms of execution and make sure they're getting everything together, and also holding off on doing the harbor pull until they have everything that they need together. Like you said, making sure that they have the mini boss there that they want to deal with, doing an excellent job to be able to avoid the frontal stun that he does end up putting out here. But also just the positioning is so strong here to make sure they're getting out of the way of everything, they're pulling it on their terms, and also making sure they're not being too far away from, again, the second boss, Lady Flame Wreath. That way they can quickly just get all of this down and start moving on to it, because a lot of times you'll see in maybe live servers where everyone will want to do the harbor pull maybe very early on, especially in fortified situation. But it's also kind of weird if you're going to go into it on tyrannical of where you want to decide. So it's excellent they're going to be able to get the trash percentage that they need while still dealing with the mini bosses in time and skipping an Enforcer to get all the percent that they need.
Yeah, Shell's Angels actually did this pull a little bit faster than Galsters. Of course, they're 8% behind in percentage, so they have to kill this Enforcer pack here, this Watcher pack here, before they can go to the boss. Unless they want to do, like, send the healer to find the spy while the others go back and clear some trash. But it seems like they don't want to do that. They're just going to clear the last trash percentage that they need before they go to the boss, while Galsters is already on that 100% and they're ready to pull Flame Wave here.
Yep, very important to have everybody stacked up together for Italics Flame Wreath, as you will have periodically some imps spawning up here, dealing quite a bit of damage if any of the casts are going to be getting off. So it's very important to make sure you're kind of staying on top of those as the fight is getting started here, being able to kind of rotate through, and you'll kind of see a little bit of a leapfrog from the DPSers as, you're rotating through stuns, but also rotating through offensive CDs, as who is going to be focusing on which one, because anytime any of these casts are going off, especially in a tyrannical situation, it can just spell disaster for the team.
Yeah, definitely. We see Shell's Angels also pulling the bus now. And Shell's Angels, if you look at the deaths, to be fair, they only have 1 death while Gallstratus has 6 deaths. So even though Gallstratus is ahead on the bus percentage, it's actually, it might be really, really close, or Shell's Angels might even be slightly ahead at this point because they have 5 less deaths. And of course, both of them still have cooldown on their Bloodlust, so you're going to save it for the last boss fight. And then it's just going to depend on who finds the spy faster, to be honest.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is also in terms of boss damage is, you know, obviously you're very incentivized to be able to keep the imps up, to be able to pump the extra single target damage, but the threat that they do pose to you, it makes it so dangerous to be able to actually reasonably pull it off. So in many ways, I'm kind of looking at the healer and tank DPS to be able to see what they can actually get away with, you know, how little of healing does both the Holy Paladins actually have to do to be able to make sure they're able to help their team as much as possible here. So you are seeing, you know, quite a bit of an advantage for Sierra on the side of Shell's Angels here over Dagon Gulchtrotters, pumping out over 1 million DPS, just staying, you know, pretty steadily around that number as they're working on catching up to Gulchtrotters.
Yeah, even though their comp is exactly the same, the damage numbers are quite different. And it might just be different cooldown timings. You know, one team used their Moon King cooldowns right before the boss maybe, and Gallstratters had their cooldowns ready. So of course the damage numbers are a little bit different, but their strategy, of course, with keeping up the imps for the rogue, it's pretty much the same thing. And as you said, Sierra doing slightly more damage than Dak, but overall, they're pretty much killing the boss at the same time.
Yeah, the interesting thing is also be able to see, using the extension that we have, is just the differences in terms of gear and trinkets that the teams want to actually be running with, because when they're running the mirror compositions, those are really the big areas to kind of run with. And you're expecting that at a top level play from, you know, all these teams across the world, you know, maybe seeing a little bit of the differences in theorycraft, where, you know, what do they want to actually run with, what are actually some of their strengths, what trinkets and items they think are actually going to give them a better advantage here.
Yeah, we see, of course, the Gallstratters already trying to find the spy. We see, of course, them using the Sky Step potion to be faster. They probably have a set rotation. For example, let's say the Holy Paladin goes top right, someone goes top left, and then you just figure out trying to find the spy as fast as possible. Of course, none of those teams do have a Demon Hunter or a Proud Paladin, so they don't have that spectral side to find the spy faster. So they do have to look at the clues and search for the spy themselves.
Yeah, you're actually seeing Sierra getting kicked out of the party there as he guessed incorrectly as which spy it would end up being. We also have to look at, you know, how long it has to take to actually grab the spy, if they're going to be a top floor, bottom floor, the extra little bit of time it takes for them to kind of walk across and be able to get everything open there. Gulchtrotters already found theirs and are engaging with the Dreadlord there. Not named Jaina, is actually named it, you know, Garaneth the Vile. Very important to make sure that you're just getting it down as fast as possible. And when you're in a tyrannical situation, it's usually not too bad to worry about any of the extra damage coming out, but when it is still a 23, so they really have to make sure that, you know, rotating through personals, but also making sure that the Shadow Bolt Volley debuff that he does put out is just allowing it to fall off before the next hit comes up. So you may actually see a couple of the DPS just kind of hang back just a little bit if the debuff hasn't quite fallen off yet.
Definitely. We see Gallstratters, the minibus is about to die, while Shell's Angels just engaged the minibus, so they're a little bit behind, as I said earlier, but it's still a 5 death difference, so it will all depend on the damage on the last boss, especially since both teams have their Bloodlust ready, and as I said, the team comp is pretty much the same, so their single target damage should also be the same, so it's going to be a very, very close matchup between those two.
Yeah, and really, and especially with the tyrannical Melandros, it's no joke of a boss. We've seen so many times the execution of it, making sure you're baiting out any of the tornadoes into the set location, trying to make as much room as possible for the DPS, but also how well the teams are going to be able to play in terms of, you know, how offensive they're going to be. They're going to try to pull out all the plugs to this because they know that even if they're going to be in a situation where, you know, they think they may be a little bit ahead, or even Shell's Angels where they played, you know, just about as cleanly as possible, they know that when you're on this world stage here, everybody is playing at the top of the level.
Yeah, there was one interesting strat. I believe it was Skyline D that we saw it for the first time. They had 3 melee players, so instead of having one person bait out the charge, they just had it bait into melee. Everyone was stacking up, so the boss never moves out of range pretty much, and they just all move together. But we see Gallstratters here doing the standard strat, where we have the Moonkin, of course, standing outside, baiting that charge on the same spot. Of course, after the charge, the boss puts a mirror image of himself there, and the mirror images are copying his abilities, as we see him cast the Slicing Maelstrom right now, which is a really big AoE on the whole group. But the images and the boss itself also do another additional AoE around him in a short radius. So of course you want to avoid standing next to the boss or standing next to the images to not get additional damage.
And they're doing a great job here to make sure that they're again, moving all of those away. And again, you're seeing Shell and both Chompy are going to be standing away from any of those images when, of course, the Slicing Maelstrom does go out because the images copy it, and they just deal tons of damage when they're all stacked up on top of each other. Other interesting thing to note is any of the tornadoes that are going to be around the room here that will, of course, stun you, and they are dispellable. So it's a very big advantage to be able to have the tank jump into it, have Sierra or Dags be able to dispel their respective tanks, and be able to get that Sephuz proc every other Slicing Maelstrom that goes out. And then the other, let's say they do that for the odds. For the evens, they're able to have, the Consumption Leech coming out from the Blood Decays to be able to help out the team. So for everyone, you're going to be able to rotate through some other CD.
Yeah, so this is really close when it comes to boss stage 3. We see Gauss-Strutters on 45%, while Shell's Angels is just very shortly behind on 51%. Of course, again, the death difference is going to mean everything here. We see 7 deaths for Gauss-Strutters, while only 1 death from Shell's Angels. So it's quite a big difference here in time. So we'll see how it goes. We also see Shell's Angels actually doing quite a lot of damage on this boss here. Like, the boss is just melting for them.
Yeah, you really see, again, difference in healer DPS, almost 300k between Sierra and Dag as they're going through this. And that really goes to show just how many little advantages can you take from your, your strategies, how much more risky can you play, how well is your team just breaking down, organizing all the different defenses that are going out to this. And Shell's Angels looks like they're just closing the gap continuously, as there's only a 30-second differential that Shell's Angels more than is catching up on.
Yeah, definitely. We see Shell's Angel was not their map pick as it was Gauss-Strutter's pick, counter pick, of course. We see Tick dying here for Gauss-Strutters. They do not have a battle rest. That means it's going to cost them not only 5 seconds more, but of course it will take them a lot more longer to finish off the boss here, as it is still on 17%. So it means more and more that Shell's Angels are actually going to 2-0 this series as they're about to kill the boss with still 2 battle rests alive. Just a very, very clean run by Shell's Angels, even though it was not their map pick.
It wasn't. And you also saw, twice that Tech had actually died on this boss specifically, right? And this is the execution. Even when the baiting is just about as perfect as it can be and as well executed as it can be, you still have to make sure you're dodging through all these things. And Shell's Angels has just played this instance so cleanly here and has caught up and absolutely just destroying this boss here. Excellent single target DPS as Shell's Angels, like you said, the 2-0 sweep.
Yeah, well done by Shell's Angels, coming in after winning the Europe Regional and proving just how good they are. And again, we don't see a whole lot of just 2-0 sweeps in these series. It's generally something worth a little bit more back and forth, but Shell's Angels played not only extremely cleanly, but they managed to balance that while also just putting up great numbers in terms of damage. And that's something we don't oftentimes see. We generally see teams willing to play a little bit more recklessly and rewards them with some more damage, maybe bigger pulls, but Trekkie, what did you see off to the side there? Because Shell's Angels just put on kind of a clinic there.
Yeah, both teams were pretty ambitious here in this dungeon. It was a tyrannical setting, which means that you are very comfortable pulling a little bit bigger packs, and we saw both teams actually do very big pulls with one of the mini-bosses, an Enforcer, and even in one case, the double Inquisitor pack too. And both teams kind of having a death or two here or there, and then obviously Gulfstars with the big one, where they end up losing a lot of people. But I really want to highlight this Gulfstrotter part here, where they're really ambitious with this very, very first pull. And we usually used to Shell's Angels doing the really big pulls, and that's why they get ahead. But here, Gulfstrotters actually pull the Invist at the start, and then running through and pulling all the trash right up to the last boss. The first boss, and then just grip everything together. Meanwhile, they have their healer deal with these beacons, because you don't really have to, you don't want to sacrifice a DPS to deal with them, and he's just running over, and while everything is dying.
Yeah, we saw both teams willing to send those paladins off to, invest their time in more fruitful endeavors as opposed to healing their Jack. It's just a waste of time, I'm sorry to say.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, but even then you're saying, they're used to do the mechanics, or they're used to be able to find this and that. But I also really have to highlight Zero, who was just doing tremendous damage in comparison to his counterpart in Dag. When you have this mirror composition coming out and you're able to say, every single boss fight, I'm pumping out another 300, 400k DPS over you, and that makes just a crazy difference, even without those extra deaths that Tech had at the end.
Right, when you see the mirror comps, when you have different compositions